On the night of January 27, 2017, Torreón, Mexico, settled into its usual quiet rhythm. The air was cool, and the streets slowly emptied. Two young women walked along the boulevard, deep in conversation, unaware that their time together was about to end. One of them was 21-year-old Serymar Soto, a young mother, hairstylist, and daughter who had endured more than most. In just 7 months, Serymar was meant to walk down the aisle in a white dress. After years of hardship, her life seemed to be finally coming together. Love, stability, and the hope of a family. But in an instant, everything changed. Somewhere nearby, headlights flared, an engine came to life, and a terrible decision was made. By morning, Serymar lay unconscious in a hospital bed, her body broken and her future uncertain. Her family would receive a confusing, devastating call, and the man who once vowed to protect her would disappear into the night. This is not the story of an accident. It is the story of what truly happened in those last moments, and of the sister who refused to stay silent when the truth was buried beneath lies. Serymar Soto was born on October 13, 1995, in Torreón, Mexico. She was the youngest of 5 siblings, and her closest sister was Sandra. From the start, Serymar was seen as a blessing who brought joy and unity to her family during a difficult time. As a teenager, Serymar harbored many dreams and a desire to explore the world. At 14, she met a young man named Isaac, and they quickly grew close. Their relationship intensified, and within 2 years, they decided to live together. At first, Serymar believed this was the beginning of a new chapter, but soon the reality turned painful. Isaac became controlling and abusive, and even his mother joined in the abuse. Despite the trauma, she stayed, hoping that having a child would bring her peace. In 2012, she gave birth to a son named Romeo, and for a short time, everything seemed better. But Isaac's behavior only worsened. He threatened to take Romeo away if she left, trapping her in fear and keeping her in a toxic situation. Desperate, Serymar confided in Sandra, who promised that the family would help her whenever she chose to leave. 2 months later, after another violent episode, Serymar finally escaped. She fled to her parents' home, where her family and local authorities helped her regain custody of Romeo. Serymar was safe, but the emotional wounds were deep. At 17, she was a young mother having to rebuild her life and self-confidence. Isaac's cruel words, that no one would love her because she had a child, haunted her. Still, she dreamed of finding someone who would accept her and Romeo completely, someone to build a real family with. She often imagined herself walking down the aisle in a white dress, starting a new chapter filled with love and stability. Over time, Serymar began to heal. She returned to school to complete her secondary education, while her parents and sisters cared for Romeo. She discovered a passion for beauty and fashion, eventually studying hairstyling. After earning her certification, she started offering hair and makeup services at clients' homes. Her charm, warmth, and dedication quickly earned her a loyal following. She was talented, hardworking, and determined to create a better life for her son. Serymar's dream was to one day open her own hair salon, a symbol of freedom and strength after years of hardship. She started saving money, gradually buying the necessary tools and products. Life slowly returned to a stable routine. One night, a friend invited her to a local event where a small band was playing. Though she wasn't usually the outgoing type, Serymar decided to go. That evening, she met Jorge Alejandro, a musician 3 years older than her. Jorge seemed polite, charming, and responsible. He told everyone he was a single father raising his daughter after his ex-partner left, which made him appear kind and dependable, exactly the kind of man Serymar had always hoped to meet. From their first meeting, Jorge was drawn to Serymar. Through mutual acquaintances, he learned about her, her work, her hobbies, and the things that made her smile. After that came bouquets of flowers, messages, and gentle dates. Serymar was 18 at the time and believed this could be the love of her dreams. By 2014, they were officially a couple. At first, everything seemed wonderful. Jorge was affectionate and attentive, and when Serymar introduced him to her family, he made a good impression. They believed, as she did, that he could be the man who would finally treat her with the love and respect she deserved. Over the next 3 years, their relationship grew stronger. Jorge and his young daughter, and Serymar and her son Romeo, lived happily together as a real family. They went on trips, celebrated birthdays, and enjoyed countless simple moments together. To everyone around them, they looked destined to be together. In July 2016, Jorge fulfilled Serymar's biggest dream. He proposed. She was overjoyed, proudly showing off her ring as she began planning the wedding she'd dreamed of since childhood. The date was set for August 9, 2017, and Serymar threw herself into preparations, full of excitement and hope for their future. By January 2017, wedding plans were well underway. On January 27th, Serymar and Jorge spent the entire day taking care of last-minute details, visiting venues, checking decorations, finalizing arrangements. It was a long day, and when they returned home around 8 p.m., they were exhausted. Later that evening, Serymar changed clothes and went with Jorge and Romeo to a small reunion organized by her old school friends. A few hours later, she brought Romeo home and asked her sister Sandra to look after him. Afterward, she went with Jorge to a music event where he was performing. Before leaving, she said goodbye to her family, promising not to be late. She continued messaging Sandra until around 12:30 a.m., then stopped responding. Serymar was known for being punctual and never stayed out past 1 a.m. When that time passed and there was still no sign of her, Sandra began to worry. Then, at 6:40 a.m., her phone rang. The call came from Jorge's number, but it wasn't him, it was his father. His voice was full of anxiety as he announced that Jorge and Serymar had been in a car accident, crashing into a trailer, and that her family needed to go to the hospital immediately. Sandra's heart sank. She rushed to tell her mother and sisters, and panic broke out. One of her sisters fainted from shock. Their father was recovering from a stroke, so Sandra tried to break the news gently to her mother. Too shaken to drive, they called a family friend who was a taxi driver to take them straight to the hospital. At the hospital entrance, they were met by Jorge's parents, but now the story had changed. Instead of colliding with a trailer, Jorge's parents said that Jorge and Serymar had crashed into a small shop, and Jorge had been transferred elsewhere. The inconsistency alarmed Sandra. Her mother, desperate to see Serymar, ran inside while Sandra stayed back for a moment, confused. When she asked Jorge's mother about the changing story, the woman reacted with hostility, snapping at her. Sandra couldn't understand the anger, but her only concern was finding her sister. She ran inside to get answers. What she saw left her devastated. Serymar was lying on a stretcher, unclothed and covered only by a thin sheet. A doctor approached and explained that her condition was critical. Sandra was horrified to learn that no one had authorized her treatment sooner. Hospital records showed that Serymar had been admitted around 1:50 a.m., nearly 5 hours before anyone notified her family. The doctor described Serymar as having a severe skull fracture, multiple broken ribs, shoulder blade, tibia, and fibula, along with numerous bruises and abrasions. However, he noted that these injuries did not resemble the result of a car crash. Then came the shocking revelation. One of Serymar's friends, who had accompanied her in the ambulance, told police that her fiancé, Jorge Alejandro, had run her over. Sandra and her mother were speechless. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. For now, all they could do was pray for Serymar's survival. She was transferred to another hospital, better equipped to treat her injuries, where doctors performed a CT scan and placed her on a ventilator. Unfortunately, she had gone too long without enough oxygen to her brain and fell into a coma. The critical hours lost between the alleged accident and the call for help had done irreversible damage. In the days that followed, Sandra felt as if she were living in a haze. She didn't know where to begin or whom to trust. Everything seemed uncertain. The story, the evidence, even the people she once considered family. A few days after what was believed to be an accident, Sandra received a phone call that changed everything. The caller was one of her father's cousins, a local government official. She told Sandra that someone from Civil Protection had informed her that a couple, Jorge Alejandro's parents, had been at the accident site. Attempting to manipulate the official report, Jorge's parents attempted to bribe investigators to alter the investigation's outcome and make it appear as though Serymar had been ejected from the passenger seat in a collision. However, the experts refused to do so because the evidence clearly showed that was not the case. According to the analysis, Serymar was not ejected from the car. She was hit directly by another vehicle. The impact speed was estimated between 130 and 160 kilometers per hour, powerful enough to propel her body almost 100 meters down the road. The accident theory no longer seemed plausible. While Sandra was still reeling from the shock, her brother, Fernando, arrived with a young woman named Nayeli, who looked both frightened and pale. That was Serymar's friend, the one who had introduced her to Jorge and had also gone with her in the ambulance that night. Trembling, Nayeli said that she needed to tell Sandra the truth, exactly the same thing she had told the police. She said that night unfolded completely differently from what Jorge's family claimed. The performance Jorge was supposed to play at had been cancelled, so the group decided to go for drinks instead. Jorge had a few drinks, then Nayeli and Serymar planned to meet another friend. Before heading out, Jorge insisted they stop by his house. While there, she went to the bathroom and soon heard shouting. Jorge was furiously yelling at Serymar, calling her names. Nayeli tried to reassure him, advising him not to treat Serymar that way anymore, but he ignored her. Enraged, he stormed out, got into his car, and sped off. Not wanting to stay in the tense atmosphere, Nayeli and Serymar decided to walk along the avenue to find a taxi. As they walked, they saw Jorge's car parked in the distance. Moments later, he started the engine. At first, they thought he was coming to pick them up, but instead, he began circling them, shouting insults and obscenities at Serymar. He passed them twice, each time more aggressive, until the third time he stopped briefly, then suddenly accelerated. Nayeli and Serymar ran in opposite directions, trying to escape before Serymar could get away. Jorge hit her with his car. The impact echoed through the night. His car crashed, but he quickly got out, grabbed his belongings, and ran. Fearing he would return, Nayeli hid nearby. When she finally approached, she found Serymar lying motionless on the ground. Some bystanders had already called an ambulance. Then, strangely, Jorge's parents arrived. They gathered his things but never went near Serymar. They offered no help, didn't talk to paramedics, and refused to ride in the ambulance. So Nayeli, in a state of panic and complete breakdown, went to the hospital with Serymar, hoping she would regain consciousness. During the ride, she got a call from Jorge's father. His request was chilling. He told her to say that everyone had been in the car and that it was just an accident. She was stunned and trembling after the call. When recounting the story to Sandra and Fernando, Nayeli also showed them screenshots of Serymar's text messages, which revealed that Jorge had abused her for months. Soon, more friends arrived at the hospital and shared similar stories, recalling how Serymar had confided in them and shown them photos of injuries she tried to excuse. Sandra suddenly began to remember all the warning signs she had ignored. The time Serymar came home with her finger in a splint, saying she had fallen, the day she wore a sweater in unbearable heat and later revealed a bruised arm underneath, the time she burned her hands and called it an accident. There had even been a mark around her wrist, which Serymar claimed came from a curling iron. Looking back, Sandra realized that each incident had been a carefully crafted excuse to hide the truth. Everything made sense now. All of it had happened before Jorge proposed to Serymar. Sandra understood that Jorge's obsession with Serymar had become dangerous. He didn't love her, he wanted to control her, and while the family celebrated the couple's engagement, unaware of the truth, it had all been built on fear and abuse. When these painful truths were revealed, Serymar was still in a coma. Days went by without improvement. Then, on February 3rd, doctors declared her brain dead. The next day, February 4th, her heart stopped. The bright, determined young woman who had dreamed of walking down the aisle never got her chance. Her story ended not with celebration, but with tragedy. A tragedy that revealed how love can turn into control and how silence can cost a life. Serymar's death devastated her entire family. For days, they clung to hope, praying she would wake up and return home to her little boy. But that hope shattered when doctors confirmed that 21-year-old Serymar had died from the injuries she suffered after being run over. The grief was indescribable. Her parents couldn't comprehend how the man they had welcomed into their home, someone they had trusted and treated with love, could do something so horrifying. He hadn't just been her boyfriend. He was supposed to be her future husband, the man who had promised to love and protect her. Now, Serymar was gone, leaving behind a 3-year-old son who would grow up without his mother. Amid her pain, Sandra knew she had to act. Sandra created an account in Serymar's name to demand justice and raise awareness about what had happened. At first, her posts were repeatedly removed, likely reported by people connected to Jorge or his family. But Sandra refused to give up. She kept creating new accounts, and eventually, one of them started gaining attention. Through that page, she not only shared updates about Serymar's case, but also began posting about other women who had suffered domestic abuse or been murdered by their partners. With her background as a lawyer, Sandra connected with families across the country who had lost daughters, mothers, and sisters to gender-based violence. Together, they built a growing network of support, a community united in the demand for accountability and justice. Each day, more people joined their cause, and what started as a small tribute to Serymar became a nationwide call to action. Yet even as the movement expanded, Jorge remained at large. Months passed with little effort from the authorities to find him. 6 months after Serymar's death, the case was still unresolved. Then, on August 9, 2017, ironically, the day Jorge and Serymar had planned to get married, Sandra received a call that changed everything. The caller was an anonymous woman who refused to reveal her identity, afraid for her safety. She claimed to have seen Jorge and shared precise details about his whereabouts, workplace, and daily routine. He was living about 4 hours from Torreón in a rehabilitation center for people struggling with alcohol addiction. According to the woman, Jorge was being sheltered by his uncle, who ran a similar facility nearby. During the day, Jorge worked at a small hamburger stand, returning to the center in the evenings. Armed with this information, Serymar's family immediately went to the prosecutor's office. The following morning, the police arrested Jorge Alejandro. He was arrested and taken back to Torreón to face justice. Although his parents tried to claim the incident had been an accident, the evidence against him was undeniable. On August 16th, the judge officially opened the case, allowing 6 months for investigation. The trial started on November 20th, 2017. Prosecutors presented clear evidence of Jorge's guilt, his relationship with Serymar, the record of abuse, and the circumstances leading to her death. Testimonies, messages, and forensic findings all supported the same conclusion. 2 days later, on November 22nd, the court announced its verdict. Jorge Alejandro was guilty of femicide, the killing of a woman driven by gender-based violence. He was sentenced to 46 years and 3 months in prison, with no chance of parole. The courtroom fell silent. For Serymar's family, justice had finally been served, but the fight wasn't over. In 2018, Jorge's lawyers appealed the ruling, claiming his human rights had been violated and that there were procedural errors. To Serymar's loved ones, this felt like an insult to her memory. The court allowed Jorge 8 years to continue filing additional appeals, a loophole often exploited within the Mexican justice system to delay or overturn sentences. Years went by. Then, in late 2023, Jorge filed another motion for an amparo, a legal protection aimed at overturning his conviction and granting him full freedom. This move sparked outrage among women's rights groups and activists across the country. Sandra, along with other organizations that fight against femicide and gender violence, organized marches, protests, and campaigns to make sure Jorge's request was denied. They carried signs with Serymar's face, chanting her name and demanding that her killer serve the full 46 years behind bars. For Sandra, it was no longer only about her younger sister. It was about every woman silenced by violence, every mother grieving, and every child left without a parent. In November 2024, Jorge's appeal was reviewed, but almost immediately another motion was filed for further examination. At that point, there was still no final decision on whether the court would accept or reject the appeal. Sandra and her family remained steadfast in their belief that justice would prevail. They want just one thing: for Jorge to stay in prison and serve every day of the 46-year sentence he earned for taking the life of Serymar Soto, a young mother whose only dream was to love and create a peaceful life with her son. In the early hours of December 29, 2016, between 2:30 a.m. and 3 o'clock a.m., chilling screams pierced the stillness of San Antonio de Tolten, a small community near Temuco, Chile. Alarmed, neighbors rushed to their windows and quickly alerted emergency services. Firefighters, police officers, and forensic teams soon arrived. When firefighters reached the scene, they were confronted with chaos. Residents gathered in fear, pointing to a house engulfed in flames. The modest sheet metal structure had already been consumed, leaving behind little more than scorched debris. Once the blaze was finally extinguished, investigators made a grim discovery inside the charred remains. That morning, within the ruins of the small home in the Temuco neighborhood of San Antonio, the bodies of 28-year-old Yini Sandoval Reyes and two of her children, 5-year-old Valentin and 2-year-old Daniel, her eldest son, 10-year-old Ignacio, was pulled from the wreckage alive but critically injured, suffering burns to over 80% of his body. He was rushed to Temuco's regional hospital, where doctors fought desperately to save him. Forensic examiners determined that while the children had succumbed to smoke inhalation, Yini's injuries told another story. She bore a deep wound to her trachea inflicted by a sharp object, along with a second stab wound to her chest. These injuries proved she had been murdered before the fire began. Prosecutor Jorge Mandiola de la Fuente reclassified her case as a homicide, though the children's deaths were still considered accidents. Investigators now faced a pressing question: had the fire been set intentionally to cover up the crime? Yet the blaze itself was puzzling. No accelerant was detected, and firefighters could not immediately confirm whether the flames were started deliberately. The initial working theory pointed to a possible electrical fault, though investigators did not rule out the possibility that the malfunction had been staged. On January 5, 2017, tragedy deepened when Ignacio, the sole surviving child, died in the hospital from complications caused by his burns. After his death, the case turned from grief to a call for justice. Leading that fight was Yini's mother, Alda Reyes, refusing to let her daughter's story be forgotten. She became a driving voice, both in the courtroom and within Chile's growing feminist movement. Alda was also the first to publicly denounce Yini's death as femicide. Meanwhile, Alda also condemned the failures of law enforcement. On the night of the fire, neighbors made repeated emergency calls to the local police. An operator answered 4 separate calls, but each time failed to gather critical information, provide instructions, or appropriately report the emergency situation. Her only response was to tell callers to contact the fire department before abruptly hanging up. There were also grave errors on the ground. A police officer had been handed an ID card found near the burned house that did not belong to any of the victims. Not only did he fail to document who had given him the card, but he later lost it in his patrol car. When summoned to testify in court about the mishandling of evidence, he failed to appear. These acts of negligence marked a turning point in the case, fueling outrage and intensifying calls for accountability. After the bodies were removed from the burned home, police officers were instructed to clean the scene. Even though Yini Sandoval Reyes's death had already been reclassified as a homicide, This action erased critical evidence that could have helped move the investigation forward. Days later, members of Yini's family were allowed to enter the remains of the house to retrieve personal belongings. What they found horrified them. Clothing scattered across the floor, bloodstains still visible on the ground. When they asked authorities to collect and analyze these items, the response was chilling. Nothing could be done, they were told, because the responsible personnel were unavailable during the New Year holiday. As a result, much of the remaining evidence was lost to exposure and neglect. As months passed with no progress, Yini's family turned to social media. They created a Facebook page in her memory and began using it to denounce what they viewed as gross negligence. One post was directed specifically at the assistant prosecutor in Temuco, who had overseen the case from the beginning and who, after nearly 6 months, had failed to deliver any meaningful results. The post harshly criticized the justice system for how it treated victims from poor and vulnerable communities. The family accused authorities of classism, insisting that Yini and her children were being treated as second-class citizens. They issued a list of demands, including an explanation as to why Yini's phone and Facebook account had not been analyzed for evidence. By mid-2018, Alda's persistence had gained national attention. The feminist collective Ni Una Menos Chile issued a formal statement of support, condemning the Chilean justice system for its patriarchal structures and blatant inequality, especially when contrasting Yini's case with that of another recent femicide in Temuco, involving a woman from an upper-class family, a case that received immediate action and extensive media coverage. That same year, on International Women's Day, Alda released a powerful public statement demanding justice not only for her daughter, but for every woman silenced by gender-based violence and neglected by the system. Yini's brother, Eric, also emerged as a vocal advocate. Through the Facebook page, he demanded an internal investigation and the removal of Assistant Prosecutor Jorge Mandiola, citing his inaction and lack of commitment. Eric denounced the indifference shown by authorities as another form of violence. He also highlighted the emotional toll the process had taken on their mother, who was left to navigate her grief with little institutional support. Shockingly, Alda's assigned therapist, provided through the National Gender Agency, was pressured to stop seeing her. The agency's attorney, Patricia, argued that if Alda could afford private legal counsel, she could also afford private therapy. Patricia, the same lawyer who had refused to file the original complaint, went so far as to suggest that Yini might have taken her own life, an offensive insinuation firmly rejected by the therapist, who vowed to continue supporting Alda for free. These abuses and oversights fueled public outrage. Yini's story began resonating far beyond her community. The family's Facebook page quickly gained thousands of followers, and media outlets started covering the case more seriously. Finally, on October 5, 2018, Chilean investigative police arrested Claudio Tolosa, a 29-year-old man who was in a broken relationship with Yini at the time of her death and the father of one of the children murdered that night. After nearly 2 years of silence, missed opportunities, and relentless advocacy, Yini's family had at last seen the first step toward justice. But the struggle was far from over. Tolosa was arrested at his workplace and formally charged on October 12, 2018, at the Court of Guarantees in Temuco. The prosecutor's office initially brought charges of femicide, though it remained uncertain whether additional charges related to the fire and the deaths of the children would follow. The court ordered him into pre-trial detention and granted 6 months for the investigation to proceed. Eventually, Tolosa was also charged with deliberately setting the fire that destroyed the home. Yet, Yini's killing was not officially classified as femicide. It was instead labeled as simple homicide. Tolosa's indictment stemmed from his second police interview, nearly 2 years after the crime, during which he confessed to murdering Yini. However, after being formally charged, he retracted his confession, claiming it had been made under pressure from investigators. He offered a new version of events, that he had gone to Yini's house that night only to deliver child support money, stayed for just 15 minutes, and left, a time frame he used to explain why his phone's geolocation placed him at the scene. His defense attorney argued that the confession was coerced and therefore invalid. During court proceedings, she also claimed the case file contained the names of 2 other individuals she believed were the real perpetrators. Yet, for unexplained reasons, they had never been investigated. Yini's family firmly rejected these claims. For the first time in nearly 2 years, prosecutors presented their full account in court. According to their version, in the early morning of December 29, 2016, Tolosa entered Yini's home while she and her children were asleep. After a brief exchange, an argument erupted, during which he violently attacked her with a bladed weapon. He slashed her throat, severing both her carotid artery, jugular vein, and delivered a second fatal wound to her chest, piercing her heart and lung. Yini died instantly. Prosecutors argued that Tolosa then stripped electrical wires, used them to start a fire in the living room, igniting a blaze that consumed the entire house and killed Yini's 3 children. On November 13, 2019, the long-awaited pretrial hearing was held. Prosecutors sought a life sentence for Tolosa, citing the brutal events of December 2016 that claimed the lives of a mother and her 3 children, aged 10, 5, and 2. The court scheduled the opening of the trial for January 9, 2020. Once again, Yini's mother, Alda, came face to face with the man accused of killing her daughter and grandchildren. He sat across from her in the Temuco courtroom. Following the advice of her therapist, Alda limited her media appearances to protect her emotional health during the exhausting process. Over several days, the prosecution, defense, and plaintiff's lawyers presented their cases. According to family attorney, the most critical pieces of evidence were admitted by the court: geolocation data from Tolosa's phone placing him at Yini's home at the time of the crime, along with multiple witness statements that exposed contradictions in his various accounts. Tolosa's defense, however, maintained that the investigation had been biased from the beginning. His lawyer argued that authorities had ignored other leads and had fixated on her client, who she insisted was innocent. To the press, she claimed the case file contained material suggesting 3 or 4 other individuals may have been involved, though she never named them. In a public statement, she implied those unnamed suspects were close to Yini, possibly family members, accusing the Sandoval family of concealing the truth. Sandoval family categorically denied these allegations. Tolosa's relatives, for their part, defended his innocence, accusing investigators of coercion and alleging that the prosecutor had been swayed by the family's campaign to have him removed. Alda publicly refuted the defense's accusations. This time, she was not alone. Both her attorney and the prosecution stood with her. The attack on her character and her family only deepened the resolve of those determined to see justice served. What began as a devastating family tragedy grew into a public legal battle, one that exposed systemic failures and highlighted the enduring strength of a mother's fight to defend her daughter's memory. One of the case's most controversial moments came when the prosecutor faced harsh criticism from feminist organizations and the media for refusing to classify Yini's murder as femicide. His reasoning rested on a legal technicality. Although Yini and Claudio Tolosa shared a child and a turbulent romantic history, they were neither cohabiting nor legally married at the time of the crime. Under Chile's existing legal framework, the charge could only be pursued as simple homicide and arson. Just 12 days before the 3rd anniversary of the deaths of her daughter and 3 grandchildren, Alda returned to court, this time to witness the start of the long-awaited trial. On January 9, 2020, proceedings formally began. Prosecutors renewed their demand for a life sentence, pressing for the harshest possible punishment for Tolosa in connection with Yini's killing and the fire that claimed her children's lives. Inconsistencies in Tolosa's testimony, coupled with damning cell phone geolocation data placing him at the crime scene, reinforced what Yini's family and feminist groups had maintained for years. Claudio Tolosa was guilty of all 4 deaths. On February 19, 2020, the Criminal Court of Temuco delivered its verdict. With his head bowed, Tolosa listened in silence as the judges read the charges. At several moments, the courtroom erupted in anguish. Yini's loved ones shouting the word they believed best described him: murderer. Outside the courthouse, Alda expressed both relief and gratitude. She thanked her legal team and the network of women who had supported her through every march, vigil, and hearing. Yet the legal chapter was not fully closed. Though the verdict was clear, sentencing was scheduled for February 29, 2020. Minor delays pushed the final announcement to March 4. The court sentenced Claudio Tolosa to 10 years in prison for the homicide of Yini Sandoval Reyes and 20 years for the arson that caused the deaths of her 3 children. In a unanimous ruling, he was also permanently barred from holding public office or exercising political rights during his incarceration. Outside the courtroom, Yini's brother voiced the family's disappointment. They had hoped for a life sentence, as prosecutors had originally sought. Instead, the punishment amounted to 30 years. Meanwhile, Tolosa's defense continued to insist on his innocence, suggesting others had committed the crime and signaling their intention to appeal. For Alda, however, the ruling represented long-awaited closure. She admitted the family had hoped for a 40-year term, but emphasized that a 30-year sentence, with no possibility of early release, still carried weight. More than the prison time itself, she said, the social condemnation of her daughter's killer was an equally vital form of justice. The prosecutor publicly expressed satisfaction with the verdict and sentencing. He underscored that the court had rejected every theory advanced by the defense, affirming that the evidence against Claudio Tolosa was overwhelming. In his words, the ruling would withstand any appeal because the court had no doubt of Tolosa's guilt. Although Yini's deaths were not legally categorized as femicide, he noted that the possibility of future reclassification was not ruled out. On June 10, 2020, the Court of Appeals in Temuco upheld the original decision, dismissing the defense's appeal in its entirety. For Yini's family, the confirmation of the 30-year sentence marked the end of a harrowing legal journey. Just weeks later, a major legal reform captured national attention. While Yini's case had not met the legal requirements for femicide under the law at the time, the Chilean Congress finally approved the long-awaited Gabriela Law. For Alda, the passage of the Gabriela Law carried bittersweet, meaning it came too late to alter her daughter's case. Yet it represented progress for countless future victims and their families. In her words, the reform was a long-overdue victory, a recognition for the many women whose deaths had been minimized by restrictive definitions. At last, she said, the path toward justice would be clearer for others, even if Yini's own battle had come at an unbearable cost. It all began with the life of Denisa Maria, a bright young woman in Madrid, full of energy, talent, and dreams for the future. But at 17, her life was snatched away in one of the most shocking cases of jealousy and obsession Spain has ever seen. On a rainy night in November 2018, Denisa opened the door to her small house. Outside is another young woman, angry, jealous, knife in hand. In seconds, Denisa's future, her ambitions, and her life were cut short. Her best friend, on the phone, heard her last desperate words as she screamed the name of her killer. But this was more than a simple crime of passion. It's a story of toxic relationships, ignored threats, and a series of decisions that leave one girl dead, another imprisoned, and the young man at the center of it all free. Who is truly responsible for Denisa's death? Is it just the person who held the knife? Or is there someone pulling the strings behind the scenes? Watch the full video to discover the truth. Denisa Maria Dragan was born in Romania in 2001 as the only child of her parents. Her birth brought great joy to her parents, who were facing financial difficulties. Their situation improved significantly a few months later, thanks to the help of a friend. Emil, Denise's father, was offered a job as an assistant bricklayer in Spain, which provided much better working conditions than he had previously. However, visa restrictions and legal issues related to migration prevented Emil and his wife Daniela from taking their young daughter Denisa with them. After a difficult discussion with Denise's grandparents, it was decided that she would stay in their care while her parents moved to Spain, hoping to reunite soon. Once in Spain, Emil and Daniela settled in Alcorcón, a small town near Madrid. Initially, they lived there without legal residency, but over time, both found stable employment. Daniela started working at an auto parts factory. Through hard work and determination, after 3 years, they were able to create a comfortable and welcoming environment and finally reunite with their daughter. Denisa was overjoyed to be with her parents again, and she quickly showed a natural talent for movement and self-expression. Noticing Denisa's abilities, her parents enrolled her in dance lessons, which she loved. Unfortunately, family happiness did not last long. As Emil and Daniela's marriage ended in divorce a couple of years later, despite the separation, Denisa remained very close to her mother, and the two supported each other when Emil moved to another city southwest of Madrid. They faced the pain of separation from Emil together, openly sharing their feelings. Meanwhile, Denisa's interest in dance and music grew stronger, and she actively participated in school performances. She also took up rhythmic gymnastics, excelling quickly in the sport. Eventually, Daniela started a new relationship and became pregnant, giving birth to a son. Denisa welcomed her new brother lovingly, taking on the role of a caring older sister. However, unexpectedly, Denisa lost interest in her previous activities. Without any obvious reason, she dropped out of school and stopped attending gymnastics classes. Her interests shifted completely. She enrolled in a vocational course in aesthetics, which became her new passion. Denisa committed herself fully and decided to pursue a career as a stylist. She began gaining experience working part-time at her aunt's hair salon while looking for a stable job in the field. With more free time, Denisa chose to spend it with friends, especially Sylvia, who became her closest confidant. During an outing with Sylvia, Denisa met Mario, a 22-year-old graffiti artist who lived with his parents in Alcorcón. Mario was locally known for his street art, but he also led a questionable lifestyle, earning extra money by taking people to buy banned substances on the outskirts of Madrid. When it came to relationships, Mario was inconsistent. Although he liked having a girlfriend, he also enjoyed flirting with multiple girls. Denisa and Mario quickly discovered shared interests, like their love of pit bulls and music, and soon developed a connection. After a few days, Mario and Denisa grew very close and started dating. Wanting to act like a gentleman, Mario introduced Denisa to his family. Denisa did the same, but her mother, Daniela, didn't take to Mario. Things got worse when she heard rumors that he was involved with banned substances. Even so, she respected her daughter's choice and didn't openly oppose the relationship despite the romantic beginning. Mario soon revealed a controlling and domineering side. At first, blinded by love, Denisa tolerated it, but it escalated. Mario tried to control her every move. He monitored her social media, questioned her about her contacts, and insisted he had the right to decide who she could see and who she couldn't. When Denisa discovered she was pregnant, she was terrified. She feared not only becoming a mother so young and unprepared, but also that pregnancy would give Mario an excuse to fully control her and the baby. Denisa confided in her mother. Daniela advised her to consider terminating the pregnancy. She knew it would be difficult and painful, but the memory of how Emil had left her alone with the child weighed heavily. She urged Denisa to think carefully about the consequences and not bring a child into circumstances that would only benefit Mario. Denisa made the choice she felt was best and told Mario, but, as mentioned, He believed he should control her life and wanted the final say. He felt rejected and betrayed because Denisa acted without seeking his approval, and he decided to make her pay for what he saw as an insult. After that, Mario radically changed his behavior toward Denisa. He started a secret relationship with a 19-year-old named Rocio Martinez, who also lived in Alcorcon. Her father, a civil guard assigned to the local municipality, had moved the family there, and they settled in a small house. Despite having diabetes and asthma since she was 4, Rocio experimented with illegal substances. It was easy for her. She lived next to a notorious house that functioned as a brothel and a place where banned substances were sold. Rocio often spent evenings there with friends, using various substances. In the village, she was known for her hot temper. She frequently caused trouble at parties, picking fights over a look or while under the influence. At night, she and her friends would set trash cans on fire or break into homes to steal items and trade them for banned substances. Neighbors didn't report her, as she was a policeman's daughter, and she took advantage of that immunity. Mario went from messaging Rocio to visiting her, and once they became a couple, he finally told Denisa and ended their relationship. Heartbroken, Denisa told her father, Emil, whom she still kept in touch with, that Mario had left her for someone else. At the same time, she felt a certain relief. To help her daughter heal, Daniela organized a family trip to the Mediterranean. On June 25, 2018, Daniela and her daughter Denisa boarded a 7-day cruise. By then, Denisa had already blocked Mario on social media. She enjoyed traveling with her family and visiting places like Barcelona, Naples, and Palermo, but she couldn't stop thinking about Mario. Despite being blocked, he still monitored her life by viewing all her public stories and statuses. This struck Denisa's mother, Daniela, as very strange and confirmed her suspicion that Mario wanted to continue controlling her daughter. When they returned home, Denisa met Mario again. Even though he was with Rocio, Mario still wanted to maintain a close relationship with Denisa and even sent suggestive messages behind her back. Eventually, the volatile Rocio found out, angry and jealous. She warns Mario that if he continues contact with Denisa, she will kill them both. Mario, knowing what Rocio was capable of, gave in to her threats. From that point, Rocio became obsessed with Denisa and started sending relentless, frightening messages to Denisa and her best friend, Sylvia. Denisa brushed them off as empty threats, but when she told her father, Emil, he took the situation seriously and called Mario to resolve the conflict. Mario tells Emil there is nothing to worry about, calling it a woman's problem, but says he will try to reassure Rocio. Emil believed him and stayed calm. He also thought that, since Rocio was a police officer's daughter, she wouldn't risk doing anything criminal that could harm her father's career. In reality, Rocio did not stop. The harassment continued. After some time, Denisa decided to move on and forget Mario. She began dating Ivan, the son of a bricklayer who lived in central Alcorcon. At first, they took long walks, and when it got late, Denisa sometimes stayed overnight at a commercial space Ivan had built. After a few weeks, they made their relationship official, and Denisa moved into his small property. Even after learning that Denisa was in a new relationship, Rocio did not stop. Determined to hurt her, Rocio kept sending threatening messages. In November 2018, Rocio told Denisa she would kill her. Rocio also claimed she was pregnant with Mario's child and that, unlike Denisa, she had the courage to give birth. Denisa forwarded all the messages to her mother, Daniela. Although Daniela was extremely worried, Denisa tried to reassure her mother, insisting that it was just bullying and not worth reporting. They did not file a complaint. Although she claimed to be pregnant, Rocio continued to use banned substances due to her addictions and lost the baby on Sunday, November 25, 2018. That day, Mario was driving people to buy a banned substance on the outskirts of the city, and Rocio was with him. At the end of the day, they stopped at a fast food restaurant. While waiting for their order, Rocio checked Mario's phone and saw he was messaging Denisa. She exploded, and they argued in the parking lot, trying to calm her down. Mario suggested they go see Denisa to settle things. Around 10 p.m., in heavy rain, Mario drove to Denisa's new residence. Ivan stepped out to buy groceries, while Denisa was on the phone with Sylvia. In the stairwell, Mario pointed out Denisa's door to Rocio. Rocio got out of the car with a knife in her hand. When someone knocked, Denisa, without hanging up or asking who it was, opened the door. She confronted Rocio. Rocio, without saying a word, stabbed Denisa in the stomach and ran away. On the line, Sylvia heard Denisa cry for help and repeat Rocio's name. Meanwhile, Rocio had already returned to the car and told Mario to drive. Only a few minutes later did she admit what she had done and said they should get rid of the knife. They immediately cleaned it and threw it away on a nearby street. The first to help Denisa was her friend Sylvia. When she arrived, Denisa was lying on the ground, close to death. Police and emergency services were called right away. They found a young woman with a deep wound and in cardiac and respiratory arrest. A paramedic managed to revive her pulse, and she was rushed to the hospital. Mario realized he couldn't go to his parents' house after the incident. Looking for a safe place, he called his aunt, Anita Banera, and said he would come by for dinner with a friend. When they arrived, Anita and her husband noticed that Rocio looked pale and nervous. Rocio apologized, saying she hadn't taken her diabetes medication before eating. Mario went out with his uncle to pick up Rocio's backpack with her medicine. After they returned and sat down to eat, the aunt and uncle suspected nothing unusual. Despite the doctor's efforts, Denisa died a few hours after being admitted to the hospital. The next morning, after hearing the tragic news, Rocio called her parents and told them what she had done. Nervous, she said she only wanted to scare Denisa. Her father drove to Alcorcon to bring her home, then called the police to report that the girl they were looking for was at his house. A few hours later, she was arrested and handed over to the homicide unit of the Madrid police headquarters. She was placed in pre-trial detention. Speaking to the media, Emil publicly described the repeated threats directed at his daughter, Denisa. He also mentioned the testimony of Sylvia, who had been on the phone with Denisa during the events. Emil told the police that his daughter had been threatened by Rocio, who was orchestrating everything. Meanwhile, in her first statement, Rocio denied any guilt. Investigators did not believe her and suspected she had an accomplice. The next morning, Rocio complained of feeling unwell, citing anxiety and insomnia, and was transferred to a medical unit. In the emergency room, within 2 hours, she spontaneously confessed everything to the 2 police officers guarding her. She also accused Mario of forcing her to kill Denisa by giving her the knife. During his interrogation, Mario described the bad relationship between the 2 girls, highlighting Rocio's ongoing jealousy of Denisa. He said it was Rocio who had asked him to take her to Denisa's home, and he denied that she had a weapon or that he saw any blood on her when she returned to the car. However, the next day, in provincial court before an unnamed judge, Mario gave a completely different version. He claimed Rocio had nothing against Denisa and had no reason to kill her, and that they had spent the day with his aunt and uncle. He apologized, said his initial statement had been misinterpreted, and avoided charges and arrest. This did not help Rocio, who remained in pre-trial detention in a women's prison. A few months later, Mario started dating a new girl, Jennifer, trying to impress her. He bragged about what had happened to Denisa, revealing his role. He did not expect Jennifer to tell Denisa's mother, Daniela, about his confession. Daniela, accompanied by her lawyer, Marcos, requested charges against Mario, believing he had participated in the crime. The pretrial judge ordered his imprisonment, But a few days later he was released under a periodic reporting requirement. Lawyer Marcos charged both Rocio and Mario with murder with violence, ongoing threats, and harassment, and in Mario's case, also requested charges for trafficking in prohibited substances. Rocio admitted to the crime, saying it happened under Mario's influence. Her defense focused on her abuse and use of prohibited substances. 2 weeks later, the Madrid Provincial Court found Rocio guilty of substance abuse and a substance use disorder, sentencing her to 18 years in prison. Mario was acquitted of all charges and released. In November 2022, Denise's family appealed the verdict. They requested a harsher sentence for Rocio and asked the court to impose a 25-year sentence on Mario as an accomplice. The family highlighted what they saw as contradictions in the jury's decision. The jury concluded that Rocio got out of the car with a knife she had taken from the glove compartment in a jealous rage, and that Mario did not hand her the weapon. Based on these findings, the family and their legal team argued that Mario should still be considered an accomplice to the murder. They also argued that the jury accepted Rocio's confession to convict her, but ignored the part where she claimed Mario had provided the weapon. For that reason, they insisted Mario should receive a 25-year sentence. Denise's relatives are now awaiting the Madrid Provincial Court's decision on the appeal. What do you think? Will Mario be convicted? In the early morning hours of January 19, 2007, firefighters entered a burning house in Fishkill, New York. Inside the smoke-filled house, they witnessed a horrific scene. 3 children were dead. Blood splattered across the walls, and the bodies of their parents burned so black they melted together. What at first looked like a house fire was, in truth, the cover-up of a massacre so savage it would horrify even seasoned investigators. The question was chilling. Who could annihilate an entire family in such a brutal way? Tony and Tina Mori first met in the early 1990 seconds. Their romance blossomed almost instantly, and before long they decided to start a family. They have 3 sons. Tony Jr., their first, was born in 1993. Adam, their second, was born 3 years later in 1996. Ryan, their youngest, was born in 2000. The family lives in Fishkill, New York. With a population of about 25,000, it was considered a safe place where neighbors knew one another and a sense of trust ran through the community. Families often chose towns like Fishkill to raise children away from the chaos of big cities. The Mori family rented a house there, quickly establishing a reputation as reliable tenants and as kind, respectable people. Their 3 boys were energetic, athletic, and well regarded for both their schoolwork and sports achievements. When Tony's mother passed away after a long illness, relatives and friends rallied together, and the family supported Tony's father through the loss. Tony had always strived to support his family well. However, he desired greater success and decided to start a business with his closest friend, but their company ultimately failed. Following this setback, he tried working for a relative's small business, but this also proved unsuccessful. The Mori's struggles truly began in 2005. Tony's push to launch a business came from growing financial pressure. For the first time, the couple fell behind on rent. After several months of non-payment, their landlord reluctantly started preparing eviction papers, hoping they would eventually make good on the debt. But the overdue rent continued to pile up, and Tony's failed ventures only made things worse. Desperate, he searched for a way to recover the family's financial footing. Despite this, the couple put on a brave face. They didn't confide in others about their looming eviction. Outwardly, they continued attending their son's school activities and sports events, presenting the picture of a supportive family. To friends and neighbors, nothing seemed amiss. When the landlord gave Tony a final warning, he still couldn't come up with the money. By then, the Moris were more than 6 months behind on rent and owed a significant sum. Tina kept working as a cashier, while Tony picked up odd jobs. But their combined efforts weren't nearly enough to cover the expenses of a family of 5, let alone repay the debt. The parents' silence extended to their children. Although the boys sensed that something was wrong, Tony and Tina never shared the full reality of their financial troubles. To deal with the mounting stress, Tony began drinking more heavily. He soon stopped actively looking for stable work and even developed a dependence on marijuana. He justified it by telling himself he was just going through a rough patch and needed something to cope until things improved, convinced the hardship was only temporary. Together, the couple tried to maintain a sense of normal life for their kids, but Tony was increasingly absent, seemingly distant. He spent long hours drinking with friends, while Tina became increasingly anxious, worrying about their children's future. By 2006, Tina confided in her relatives. She admitted she was considering divorcing Tony, or at least separating for a time so that he could recover, find steady work, and rebuild his sense of responsibility before they reunited. She dreamed of advancing her own career, hoping one day to study law. But with the family struggling to keep a roof over their heads, higher education was out of reach. Tony, too, sensed his wife pulling away. Even before Tina spoke of separation, tension weighed heavily on the household, and stress became a constant presence. He kept drinking heavily as the strain deepened. Life carried on in this unsettled way until early 2007, at 3 a.m. On January 19, 2007, multiple emergency calls were placed. Witnesses reported flames erupting from a home in Fishkill, New York. Firefighters reached the scene to find heavy flames consuming the rear of the house. Thick black smoke poured out of the windows. They forced entry through the main door and made their way upstairs for a better angle to attack the fire. On the second floor, they split up. One firefighter entered a child's bedroom and spotted something unusual on the bottom bunk. There, he discovered a small body, carrying the child outside. He laid him on the lawn to render aid and immediately saw that the boy's jacket was soaked in blood. The child was lifeless. His pajamas were drenched, showing clear evidence of foul play. He was later identified as 13-year-old Tony Jr. Mori. The firefighter returned to the upper floor and quickly pulled out a second boy, 10-year-old Adam, who was also dead. While battling the fire, another firefighter discovered a third child, 6-year-old Ryan, lying on the living room floor. All 3 children were brought to the yard. It was clear they had not died from smoke inhalation or the flames. Detectives and forensic specialists arrived even before the fire was fully extinguished. Neighbors gathered outside, telling police that the Mori family of 5 lived there. Firefighters had not yet located the parents. Once the smoke cleared enough for a more thorough search, they uncovered a 4th victim inside, at the very spot where the fire had begun. The remains were so badly charred that gender was not immediately clear. It is believed the body is that of Tina Mori. Her remains were severely disfigured, and the medical examiner faced a difficult task determining cause of death. The results were shocking. Meanwhile, the family's father, 33-year-old Tony Mori, was reported missing. The house showed no signs of forced entry. Investigators confirmed the blaze originated in the area where Tina's body was found. The children's room bore splashes of blood, and a bloody handprint was discovered on a wall, an important early clue thought to belong to the killer. The family's car was absent from the driveway. Though tire tracks showed it had recently been there, detectives initially theorized that Tony had killed his family and escaped in the car. Less than an hour after the blaze at the Mori home, another emergency call came in. About half a kilometer away, a Kia was burning. Responding units found no one inside, but a license plate check confirmed the vehicle was registered to Tony's father. Investigators recovered several .22 caliber shell casings inside, along with a pair of bloody gloves. This seemed to reinforce suspicions against Tony, but the medical examiner soon made a startling discovery. What appeared at first to be a single body was actually two bodies fused together in a tight embrace. Closer examination revealed that Tony and Tina had died together. Their remains burned so badly, they were nearly inseparable. This shocking revelation proved the initial theory, that Tony had slaughtered his family before fleeing, was completely unfounded. To formally identify the charred remains, investigators had to rely on dental records. The condition of the bodies made it extremely difficult to trace bullet paths, as the heat had caused severe tissue deformation. Still, the medical examiner was able to determine the nature of each victim's wounds. The slaughter of an entire family was almost beyond comprehension. Tina Mori had suffered 3 gunshot wounds, 1 to the back of the head, 1 to the face, and 1 to the chest. Her husband, Tony, had been fatally shot in the back of the head. Tony Jr., 13, suffered multiple stab wounds. 10-year-old Adam had been stabbed repeatedly in the face and neck. 6-year-old Ryan had died from a combination of blunt force trauma to the head. Traces of carbon monoxide in his lungs showed that he was still alive and breathing when the fire began. All 5 members of the Mori family perished inside the house. Many questions immediately arose. What exactly had happened that night, and who had driven off in Tony's father's car before setting it ablaze? The following day, news of the Mori family's death spread rapidly through Fishkill, sending shockwaves across the community. The classmates of the Mori children were especially devastated. Because the burned Kia had been registered to Tony's father, investigators questioned him the next morning at his workplace. He explained that he had given the car to his son back in 2005 and had no idea what had happened at his son's home. When detectives told him that Tony, Tina, and all 3 grandchildren were dead, he was crushed. Having already lost his wife just a year earlier, the revelation that his entire family had been brutally murdered left him shattered. Detectives quickly cleared Tony's father of any involvement. His alibi was solid, but he also had no idea who might have wanted to destroy the family. Investigators concluded that the fire had been deliberately set to cover up the murders. Fire experts confirmed the use of accelerants. Neither the gun nor the knife used in the killings was recovered from the scene. Police suspect that the killer may have injured himself in the attack. They checked local hospitals and clinics for recent admissions with hand or arm cuts, but none were reported. By morning, the press had caught wind of the tragedy. News outlets reported the story widely, urging the public to come forward with tips. Within days, the burned-out home had turned into a memorial site. The fence surrounding the property was soon covered with flowers, cards, and notes of condolence left by grieving residents. On January 25, with police approval, the landlord, who had been renting the house to the Moris, ordered the remains of the building demolished so he could rebuild. The decision angered some townspeople, but detectives reassured the public that the crime scene had already been thoroughly processed and their focus had shifted to identifying suspects. 10 days after the murders, a teenager playing hockey with his uncle on a frozen lake lost his puck in some brush near the shore. When he went to retrieve it, he stumbled upon a bloody hunting knife. The boy immediately told his uncle, who avoided touching it and called the authorities. When police arrived, they noted that the knife had been discarded about a 20-minute drive from the Mori home. Nearby, broken ice suggested that something else had been sunk in the lake. Divers soon recovered a cache of evidence: men's and women's underwear, a metal lockbox, a firearm, and several articles of clothing, many of them stained with blood. All of it was sent to the forensic lab for testing in Eschen. Relatives of the Mori family identified the recovered safe as the one stolen from their burned-out home. Further confirming that the killer had known them personally, the intruder had entered without forcing entry and gone straight to where valuables were hidden. This suggested familiarity. So investigators began looking closely at people in the Mori's immediate circle. Their attention soon turned to an 18-year-old named Frankie. He was a troubled teenager who struggled with family issues. He had switched schools multiple times, often clashed with authority, and picked up a few minor charges. Frankie is a frequent visitor to the Mori family. Tina treated him like one of her own sons. He often stayed overnight, sharing meals with them, since his own father was a drunk and abusive. Tony and Tina wanted to give the boy some stability. Police learned that Frankie had actually been living with the Moris for several weeks leading up to the murders. But he wasn't among the victims. Just 3 days before the crime, Frankie had been arrested for breaking into a school. He dismissed it as a prank, but his legal troubles made him a person of interest. When interviewed, Frankie reacted with intense emotion upon hearing of the Mori family's deaths, seemingly more devastated than over his own family life. He admitted knowing about the safe under Tony's bed, saying it contained cash and marijuana. Sometimes he smoked from Tony's stash and even resold small amounts for pocket money. Still, his alibi checked out, and he was ruled out as a suspect. Detectives next turned their suspicion toward the Mori's landlord. The family owed him significant back rent, and eviction proceedings had already begun. Relations between landlord and tenants had grown tense. Investigators considered whether a dispute could have escalated into murder, but the homeowner had a strong alibi, so the police quickly ruled him out as a suspect. Other leads also came up empty. Friends and neighbors described the Moris as warm and generous. Yet curiously, no one seemed to know about Tony's side income from banned substances dealing Alizen. Banned substances, disputes often escalated to violence. Perhaps Tony had crossed someone, withheld money, or racked up a dangerous debt. This angle needed to be explored. One name kept coming up in interviews: Charles Giglio Jr. Charles was an old friend of Tony's, dating back to high school. Even as adults, they remained close, often riding ATVs and barbecuing together. Charles, 31, worked as a roofer. He lived with his wife and their 3-year-old son. Tony considered him like a brother. But during an interview, detectives immediately noticed a deep cut across Charles's forehead. He claimed it happened in an ATV accident. At first, the excuse sounded reasonable, until he admitted he always wore a helmet while riding. The location of the injury would have been completely protected, making his explanation suspicious. Charles also provided an alibi. He said he had been home the night of the murders, drinking with a friend, 29-year-old sanitation worker Mark Serrano. Detectives questioned Serrano, and while his story generally aligned with Charles's, there was one glaring detail: the lake where investigators had recovered the knife, gun, and safe was located just minutes from Serrano's home. Looking deeper, detectives discovered that Tony, Charles, and Mark were all connected through the same banned substances supplier. At first, Serrano was reluctant to talk, but when promised protection from prosecution, he admitted that on the night of the murders, Charles and Mark had visited him to buy banned substances. This directly contradicted the men's claim that they had been drinking at home. The lie was not unexpected. After all, no suspect wanted to admit to banned substances, trafficking. But for investigators, it was the break they needed. Detectives launched a detailed review of Charles Giglio and Mark Serrano's cell phone records and location data from the night of January 18 to 19, 2007. Investigators determined that Serrano's car was driven in the vicinity of the Mori family's house not long after the fire started. Based on forensic evidence, investigators considered several scenarios, but the most convincing theory was that Charles and Mark had gone to Tony's house to continue partying and smoke marijuana. At some point, an argument broke out that spiraled into murder. This theory gained traction when witnesses confirmed that Tony and Charles's friendship was volatile. The two argued constantly. One witness recalled Charles threatening Tony with a knife, and others confirmed he had openly vowed to burn down the Mori home. Both suspects were investigated aggressively. Serrano's longtime girlfriend told police she recognized the knife recovered from the frozen lake. It was identical to one she had given him 3 years earlier. Forensic testing confirmed her suspicions. DNA from Adam and Ryan Mori was found on the blade. Clothing retrieved from the lake, identified as belonging to Serrano, also tested positive for the victim's blood. With this evidence, Serrano was brought back in for questioning. His story began to shift. At first, he claimed he couldn't remember much due to heavy drinking, but soon recalled fragments. A parking lot, a gas station, a store. Detectives knew they were breaking him down. He admitted that he and Charles had gone to meet a dealer that night to buy banned substances. But Charles, who owed Tony money, insisted they could get more from Tony directly. Serrano initially denied recent contact with Tony, but phone records proved otherwise. He had called Tony shortly before the murders. Pressed further, Serrano conceded that he drove Charles to Tony's house. He insisted, however, that he stayed in the car while Charles went inside, and that he only saw Charles again 2 hours later, this time driving Tony's car, which was later found torched on the roadside. Over multiple interrogations, Serrano's account shifted repeatedly. In every version, Charles entered the house while Serrano remained outside. Detectives recognized this as a clear attempt to minimize his role. Lacking conclusive proof at that moment, Serrano was temporarily released, though investigators collected his palm print for comparison against one lifted from the Mori children's bedroom wall. Charles Galeo's home was also searched, but no incriminating evidence turned up. Brought in for questioning, Charles invoked his right to remain silent, offering only vague denials. The turning point came when forensic experts confirmed that the bloody palm print on the bedroom wall was a match to Mark Serrano. It was the first piece of direct evidence placing him inside the Mori home during the murders. Serrano was arrested immediately. A search of his car revealed bloodstains on the floorboard that matched Tony Mori's DNA. In a 9-hour interrogation, Serrano finally cracked. He admitted entering the house but insisted it was only after Charles had been gone too long. Inside, he claimed, he stumbled upon a nightmarish scene and touched the wall to steady himself, accidentally leaving his palm print in blood. He continued to maintain that Charles alone committed the killings. Both men shifted blame relentlessly, each trying to portray the other as the sole perpetrator. With the mounting forensic and circumstantial evidence, prosecutors decided to charge both Charles Galeo and Mark Serrano with first-degree murder. They were ordered held without bail. Mark Serrano's trial took place in November 2007. Prosecutors described him as an active participant in the massacre, arguing that Serrano entered the Mori family's home on the night of January 19 and stabbed the children. His defense attorney tried to shift the blame onto Charles Galeo, stressing that Charles had repeatedly clashed with Tony Mori and had even threatened to burn the family's house down. Serrano's longtime girlfriend testified that, in the days after the murders, he acted strangely and even confessed to killing Tony and Tina. Prosecutors emphasized the bloody palm print found on the bedroom wall as irrefutable proof of Serrano's presence and involvement in the crime. Despite his efforts to deflect responsibility, after just 5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Mark Serrano guilty of first-degree murder and assault, convicting him of killing all 5 family members. Charles Galeo's trial began on February 4, 2008. His defense attorney likewise argued that Serrano was the true killer. The prosecution faced greater challenges since no DNA evidence linked Charles directly to the crime scene or the discarded items recovered from the lake. Still, Galeo's history of threats and his long-standing feud with Tony painted him as a central suspect. During this trial, Serrano testified against Charles, claiming that Charles killed the Mori family in the course of a robbery. According to Serrano, Charles shot Tony first, then Tina, before killing the 3 boys one by one. Prosecutors pointed out inconsistencies between Serrano's testimony here and his earlier statements during his own trial, but the account nonetheless strengthened the case. After lengthy deliberations, in early March 2008, the jury returned a verdict. Charles Galeo was guilty. He received 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. He is serving his sentence at Clinton State Prison in Dannemora, New York. Shortly afterward, Mark Serrano's sentencing was announced. He was sentenced to 50 years to life in prison, a reduced term because of his cooperation with investigators and his testimony against Charles Giglio. He is currently being held at Great Meadow Prison in Comstock, New York, and will be eligible for parole in 2056. The tragedy continued to reverberate. In May 2008, Tony's father, who had already lost his son, daughter-in-law, and 3 grandsons, passed away at just 57 years old. Relatives believed he died of a broken heart. With his death, the Maury family line effectively came to an end, leaving the community grieving an irreplaceable loss. A seemingly innocent text message from his ex-girlfriend turned into a one-way ticket to death for 15-year-old Seth Jackson. On the night of April 17, 2011, Seth left home hoping to mend his relationship, but instead of hugging his ex, he fell into a deadly trap. What followed was more than a murder. It was a long torture, ending with the body burned in flames, ashes strewn across the roadside. The case turned a quiet Florida town into a center of horror, leaving a chilling question: how could teenagers just starting out in life commit such a heinous crime? Seth Jackson was born on February 3, 1996, in Bellevue, Florida. He grew up with 2 older brothers in nearby Summerfield, dreamed of one day becoming an ultimate fighting championship fighter. On Sunday, April 17, 2011, 15-year-old Seth spent the day like any other teenager, relaxing, playing video games, and chatting with friends. But this ordinary afternoon would lead into one of the most shocking crimes the town of Summerfield, Florida, had ever witnessed. That night, Seth received a message from his ex-girlfriend, 15-year-old Amber Wright, asking to meet so they could talk about getting back together. At first, he was excited by the idea, but also wary, since Amber insisted he not tell anyone. He couldn't understand why she suddenly wanted to rekindle their relationship when she was already seeing someone else. Seth suspected it could be a prank or worse. He shared the news with friends, who warned him not to go. But Amber insisted she had made a mistake and still loved him. Eventually, Seth gave in and agreed to meet her, unaware he was walking straight into a trap. When Seth failed to come home, his parents quickly grew worried and contacted the police. From the beginning, they suspected Amber knew more than she was saying. Their relationship had ended badly when Seth discovered she was cheating on him with Michael Bargo. Before the breakup, Amber had dated Seth for about 6 months, often visiting his house, sharing meals with his family, and becoming a familiar presence. His parents had welcomed her, believing she was important to their son's future. Amber appears to be a normal young woman, but after she spends more and more time at the Jacksons' home, the Seth family begins to notice unsettling traits. His mother described Amber as manipulative, and later believed her infidelity was less about love and more about deliberately hurting Seth because he would not give in to her demands. On that fateful night of April 17, 2011, Amber was not alone at the trailer on the edge of the woods. She was accompanied by her 16-year-old brother, Kyle Hooper, and her 18-year-old boyfriend, Michael Bargo. Also present was Charlie Ellie, Etienne, and Justin Soto, 20, a close friend of Bargo's. Together, they formed a deadly group. At first, Seth was reported missing, sparking a search effort that lasted for days. But the truth came out sooner than expected. One of the teens finally cracked under the weight of guilt. Ely confided in his mother that he had witnessed a killing at the trailer. Horrified, she went straight to the police. Ely later repeated his account to investigators, admitting that seeing Seth's grieving mother on the news had pushed him to come forward. His conscience could no longer bear the weight of silence. According to his testimony, the plan had been clear. Amber would lure her Seth to the trailer, where the others would confront him. Ely claimed he thought the intention was only to rough Seth up, not kill him. But as soon as Seth stepped inside, the attack began. Kyle struck him over the head with a wooden board, supposedly just to teach him a lesson. Amber had told the group that Seth had abused her, using that as justification for the assault. While Amber herself did not physically strike Seath, she had played the most crucial role, delivering him straight into the ambush. According to Kyle, the other young men soon appeared. A heated argument broke out between Seath and Michael Bargo. Without warning, Michael pulled a pistol from his waistband and fired several shots. From the kitchen, Amber heard the gunfire and realized the situation had spiraled completely out of control. But by then it was too late. As soon as the violence erupted, Kyle ran away. His sister and the others, however, did not return home until the next morning. Amber, in her own statements, insisted she had been shocked by what unfolded. According to her, she did not fully grasp the horror until the next day, when she realized her ex-boyfriend was dead. Detectives, however, never believed her. From the start, they suspected she was downplaying her involvement and deliberately trying to mislead the investigation. When law enforcement first interviewed Amber, their focus was on reconstructing what had happened in the trailer, but the place had been meticulously cleaned, leaving behind almost nothing to analyze. Investigators had to rely on the suspect's conflicting accounts, and Kyle's testimony alone wasn't enough. From the outset, Amber proved herself untrustworthy. In her first interview, she claimed she had arranged to meet Seath that day, but that he never showed up, so she simply went to bed around noon. She denied having any connection to the trailer. That story quickly unraveled once detectives questioned those close to both the suspects and the victim. Everyone seemed to know each other well, and several confirmed what the police already suspected, that Amber was manipulative, cunning, and far crueler than she appeared. The Seath family in particular is certain of this. The interrogations intensified. Amber dodged questions, shifting blame to others. Under pressure, she repeatedly changed her story. First, she blamed her brother Kyle. Then she claimed her friend Michael had suddenly decided to fight Seath. Conversations with Charlie Ely and Justin Soto, however, proved more productive. Investigators gained much clearer information, including the location of the murder weapon. The pistol was eventually recovered and became the key piece of evidence tying Michael Bargo directly to the killing. According to the teen's accounts, Seath had been lured into the trailer, brutally beaten, and then shot multiple times. His body was transported to a nearby quarry, where the group built a bonfire to destroy the evidence. After burning the remains, they collected the ashes in large buckets. Some were dumped directly into the quarry, while the rest were scattered along the roadside as they drove away. If not for Kyle's guilty conscience, the crime might never have been uncovered. Seath's parents lived several kilometers from the scene, and both they and investigators were left bewildered, unable at first to see any clear motive for such a savage attack. The group tried to justify the murder by abuser Seath as a cheater, a banned substances user, and an abuser. All claims fed to them by Amber, but investigators never found a shred of evidence to support these accusations. The scale of the brutality Seath Jackson endured before his death was horrifying. His torment stretched on for hours, forcing investigators to painstakingly piece together what had happened. The lack of a body initially posed a major challenge. There was almost nothing left to recover. The lies spun by the perpetrators only deepened the confusion. For a time, detectives even suspected Amber might have fired the fatal shot. She denied this fiercely, instead painting a picture of her relationship with Seath. When they first met, she recalled, she had been immediately drawn to how cool he was. They laughed, had fun together, and formed what she described as a close bond. Amber later accused him of cheating, despite having no evidence, and friends suspected she enjoyed stoking jealousy as a way to control him. After several tumultuous months, the pair finally split. The breakup was messy and bitter. On social media, the two exchanged insults and threats, posts that would later be retrieved and analyzed by investigators. These messages undercut Amber's story. Seath suggested she had cheated on him with Michael Bargo. and that this was the true reason for the split, according to the other teens' testimony. One night at the trailer, Amber and Michael openly discussed how Seath needed to be taught a lesson, even suggesting he should be killed. Whether they realized it or not, the group seemed swept up by Amber's manipulations. During interrogations, each participant tried to minimize their role, claiming they thought the conversation was just a joke. Still, they all agreed. Amber's job was to lure Seath to Charlie Ely's trailer. When investigators finally reconstructed the crime, the reality was even more horrifying than first imagined. Seath was ambushed, beaten, and shot, but survived. In the chaos, he managed to break free and flee the trailer. He almost made it to the road, just a few dozen meters away from possible rescue. But his pursuers caught up to him, shooting him in the legs to stop his escape. Dragged back inside, he was beaten again and shoved into a bathtub, where he was shot multiple times at point-blank range. The torture didn't stop there. At Michael Bargo's command, the teens shattered Seath's kneecaps so they could fold his body into a sleeping bag. Working together, they stuffed him inside. Michael then ordered another chilling act. Using pliers, they yanked out Seath's teeth, hoping to make identification impossible for forensic experts. Only then did they carry the body to a nearby quarry, where they built a massive bonfire and set it ablaze. Throughout the night, the group showed no trace of remorse. The scene resembled a twisted party, drinking, laughing, and chatting as the flames consumed Seath's body. Amber later insisted she had left immediately after the killing and had no part in what followed. She claimed she was horrified by her friend's actions, dismissing the murder plot as a bad joke. But detectives did not believe her. When Amber was questioned again, she admitted that Seath's death was shocking and unexpected. She claimed she only realized something terrible had happened when he was still missing the following day. He hadn't been seen for almost 24 hours, and his worried parents kept calling her. She insisted she had no idea where Seath was, while her friends refused to answer questions about him. Amber said, by the end of the day, she understood he must be dead. When the gruesome details of the crime emerged, Seath's parents were devastated. Seath's father called the teenager's actions utterly inhuman, a profound desecration of both Seath and his body. He insisted that Seath had done nothing to deserve such cruelty. Naturally, the Jackson family demanded justice and the harshest punishment for those responsible. As the investigation unfolded, the suspects were identified and arrested separately. Michael Bargo, however, initially managed to evade capture. Taking advantage of his absence, the other teenagers quickly shifted the blame onto him. Kyle insisted the gun had been in Michael's hands all along and that the attack had been entirely unprovoked. Investigators soon became convinced that Michael had indeed been the one who wanted Seath dead and had acted on that desire. The others, meanwhile, tried to shield Amber, claiming she bore no responsibility and that detectives were mistaken about her role. They insisted that unless their view was taken seriously, Amber would suffer unfairly for something she hadn't done. Ironically, their defense of her only deepened suspicions about her manipulative influence. The accomplices portrayed themselves as victims, claiming that Michael had lured them into the crime, much like Amber had lured Seath to the trailer. As their stories shifted under pressure, they began to argue that fear had forced them to stay and help clean up after the murder. According to them, Michael had intimidated them into destroying evidence, burning the body, and scrubbing the trailer. Detectives dismissed these excuses. Michael Bargo, the suspected shooter, remains at large, and the manhunt for him continues to intensify. Amber, for her part, tried to pin everything on her new boyfriend. She told detectives that Michael had been obsessed with proving his toughness, especially to her. She claimed that after the plan was formed, Michael gathered his friends and showed off his gun, bragging that he'd read online about how fire could reduce human bones to ash if it burned hot and long enough. At first, the others didn't take him seriously, but his disturbing comments became a regular refrain. He seemed fixated on killing Seath, unable to let the idea go. Eventually, he ordered Amber and Charlie to lure the victim to the trailer. Detectives, however, believed Amber was lying yet again, twisting facts to protect herself while throwing Michael under the bus. The case was further complicated by a media frenzy and public outrage. Locals demanded retribution, while police scrambled to untangle the conflicting stories. Ultimately, all of the teenagers were charged with first-degree murder and held at the county jail. Even then, Amber and her accomplices seemed oblivious to the gravity of their crimes, believing that once Michael was caught and convicted, the rest of them would walk free. But given the sheer brutality of the murder, the torture, and the burning of the body, prosecutors made a crucial decision. Every single one of them would be tried as an adult, including 15-year-old Amber Wright. Defense counsel attempted to minimize Amber Wright's role, but prosecutors were adamant. She was no passive participant. She was the mastermind. From the very beginning, the state announced it would pursue either the death penalty or life imprisonment. Refusing to consider plea deals, Amber's age spared her from capital punishment. Her boyfriend, Michael Bargo, faced a far grimmer possibility: execution by lethal injection if convicted. Michael, fully aware of the consequences, avoided being held with the others. He understood that flight was his only chance at evading justice. Detectives tracked him relentlessly, eventually finding him holed up in a friend's rented apartment nearly 100 kilometers from his home. The moment police arrived at his door, Michael demanded a lawyer, before they could even state their purpose. His defensive behavior only heightened suspicions, erasing any hope of cooperation. When questioned, Michael portraying Amber as a cold-blooded manipulator who had ensnared him and his friends. According to him, her motive was revenge. She called Seath a cheater, a cruel abuser, and the reason for her substance problems. Over time, Michael claimed Amber convinced him that Seath was nothing more than a monster who deserved death. But Amber told detectives the opposite. She insisted she was the one manipulated, unable to resist Michael's toxic influence because of her feelings for him. In court, Michael tried to distance himself further, denying he'd ever been romantically involved with Amber and calling her nothing more than a friend. But evidence crushed that claim. Records showed they had slept together multiple times. And, more damningly, investigators discovered tattoos of each other's initials on their private areas. Michael still insisted the tattoo was Amber's idea, designed to hurt Seath and provoke their breakup. Amber, in turn, denied wanting to cause more pain. For Seath's mother, this was unbearable. She watched in horror as her son's killers attempted to smear his memory, where Amber painted Seath as a manipulative, abusive cheater. His mother described a broken-hearted boy, devastated by betrayal. To her, he was not the monster Amber made him out to be, but a victim of her cruelty. While Kyle appeared remorseful, Amber showed little emotion, fueling the belief that she was a calculating manipulator who had lured Seath to his doom. The prosecution's most damning evidence was the text correspondence, messages, Amber used to coax Seath into coming to the trailer. He had sensed the danger, even asking her directly if it was a trap. She reassured him, promising she was alone and wanted to reconcile. Instead, she delivered him straight into the hands of his killers. In 2011, trials for the group concluded. In June 2012, Amber Wright and Kyle Hooper were both convicted of first-degree murder. They were later sentenced to life in prison. Prison records show Amber remains in custody at Homestead Detention Center in Miami-Dade County, Florida. Charlie Ely and Justin Soto also received life sentences, but Charlie's conviction was overturned in 2020, leading to Charlie pleading guilty to a lesser sentence and eventually being released. Michael Bargo, the 23-year-old shooter, was sentenced to death, making him the youngest person on Florida's death row. Although Amber Wright was initially sentenced to life in prison, her defense team secured a retrial in 2016, The outcome, however, remained the same. The jury once again found her guilty and reaffirmed her life sentence. Amber and Michael cut all contact once incarcerated. She later stated that she could never speak again to the man who had destroyed her life. In a rare moment of apparent contrition, Amber apologized to Seth's mother for her unintentional involvement in the crime. The murder of Seth Jackson remains one of Florida's most disturbing reminders of how jealousy, manipulation, and youthful recklessness can escalate into unimaginable cruelty. Seth's grieving family struggled to see past the deception and betrayal that led to his death. For them, justice may have been served in the courtroom, but no sentence can ever undo the loss of a boy whose life ended before it had truly begun. On a cold December in 2009, a motorist in Ridge, Long Island pulled over to investigate what looked like a small roadside fire. Within moments, the horrifying truth revealed itself. A human body was burning, bound in layers of plastic and tape, mutilated to strip away every identifying feature. Fingers were missing, ears were gone, and a rectangular patch of skin had been excised from the lower back. A calculated attempt to erase identity. That body belonged to 24-year-old Rebecca Coster, a vibrant young woman from Medford, New York, who had spent her short life caring for others. Just hours earlier, she had been laughing with friends at a local bar. By morning, she was reduced to charred remains left on an empty road. Her horrific death, and the grisly efforts her killer took to cover her tracks, sent shivers down the spines of her family, the community, and investigators. Rebecca Coster was born and raised in Medford, a quiet suburb on Long Island, New York. She lived with her mother, Barbara Ross, and stepfather, Larry Ross. Rebecca was very close with her younger brother. Barbara worked as a nurse and was a role model for Rebecca, while Larry took care of the house. From an early age, Rebecca had a naturally warm personality. She was approachable, a great conversationalist, and had a gift for lifting spirits when times were tough. Friends described her as full of energy. That mix of compassion and her mother's example inspired Rebecca to pursue a career in healthcare. After completing her training, she began working as a nursing assistant at a local clinic, where she dedicated herself to caring for people with disabilities. She connected with her patients, even the ones who were hardest to reach. Her coworkers admired how seriously she took her work and how deeply she cared. Outside of work, Rebecca lived an active and social life. She enjoyed going out with friends, exploring the city, and taking short road trips. She had a wide circle of acquaintances, but remained especially close to her best friend, Nicole. People trusted Rebecca. She was honest, dependable, and always ready to listen or give advice. Rebecca's dreams stretched beyond her current job. She wanted to grow in her career and build a life on her own terms. Though never far from her family, she shared a particularly strong bond with her mother. They had their routines, dinners together, quick chats before work, and daily phone calls. In her personal life, she had recently started dating a man named Dan Mayer. The relationship was still new, and her family didn't know him well. There were occasional arguments, but nothing that seemed especially troubling. Barbara recalled Dan as calm and quiet, but admitted she never fully trusted him. On the night everything changed, Barbara was getting ready for her evening shift at the clinic. As always, she made sure everything at home was in order before heading out. In the kitchen, she found Rebecca joking with her younger brother, playfully trying to steal his food. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Before leaving, Barbara asked her daughter about her plans for the night. Rebecca said she was going to meet her friend Nicole, her boyfriend Dan, and a few others. She promised she'd be back early since she had work in the morning. Barbara reminded her to be careful, then headed off to her shift. Rebecca and her friends had arranged to meet at Butcher Boy's Bar and Grill, a local bar the group often frequented. It was a popular hangout spot for young people, and only a short drive from home. That night, the atmosphere was casual. Familiar faces. Laughter. The evening began without incident. Rebecca sat with Nicole and Dan while the others mingled. At one point, she stepped away from the group and sat alone for a bit. That's when a man, unfamiliar to everyone there, approached her. He was noticeably older than most of the crowd and dressed more like a businessman than someone out for a casual night at a bar. He introduced himself as James Brown and struck up a conversation. At first it seemed harmless, just casual chit-chat. But then he picked up her phone and typed something. Later, it would be revealed that he had saved his number in her contacts. His behavior was unusually forward for a casual encounter, and it didn't go unnoticed. A friend named Jennifer, who was also at the bar that night, later told investigators she felt uneasy the moment she noticed the stranger. He was asking Rebecca odd, personal questions and seemed fixated on her from the minute he walked in. Jennifer said it felt like he had singled Rebecca out, and he wasn't subtle about wanting to keep the conversation going. Just to be safe, and with Rebecca's consent, Jennifer saved his number in her own phone. Despite Jennifer's concerns, Rebecca didn't seem especially bothered by the encounter. She soon rejoined her group, and the night carried on as usual. To everyone there, it looked like nothing more than a random conversation at a bar. But that brief interaction would later prove to be the spark that set off a chain of events ending in tragedy. At 3:30 a.m., Rebecca sent her mother a short text, saying she had arrived home. It was part of their nightly routine, to a quick message to let her mother know she had arrived safely. After that, her phone went silent. When Rebecca failed to show up for her morning shift at the clinic, her coworkers tried calling, then contacted her family. Larry phoned Barbara to tell her that Rebecca never made it to work. Soon the calls started pouring in, friends and family members reaching out, one after another, but none were answered. The family began checking with those who had been with her the night before. Nicole said she had left the bar earlier than the rest and hadn't spoken to Rebecca after that. Everything had seemed normal when she left. Dan, Rebecca's boyfriend, said he had driven her home around 3:30 a.m., walked her to the door, and then left. According to him, she went inside. That was the last time he saw her. By midday, it became clear that searching on their own wasn't enough. Barbara and Larry contacted the police and provided a full description: Rebecca's height, what she was wearing, her daily routine, job schedule, and social circle. Everything they could think of. At first, investigators considered the usual possibilities. Maybe she'd stayed over with a friend, gone somewhere unexpectedly, or her phone had simply died. But no calls turned up any answers. No one had seen her, and the silence from her end was completely out of character. The case quickly escalated into a potentially dangerous situation. Her family urged police to act quickly, insisting that Rebecca would never vanish without telling anyone. She was dependable and never once missed work without notice. The silence was deeply alarming. The most important lead at that point came from Dan. He was the last known person to see her, and his account of walking Rebecca to the door became the official starting point of the investigation. The next logical step was clear: a formal interview with Dan and a thorough review of his timeline. He was brought in and asked to recount to investigators every detail. When he left the bar, how he got to Rebecca's house, where he parked his car, and exactly when they parted ways. Dan answered calmly, repeating that he hadn't harmed her and hadn't seen her since that night. He even handed over his phone for review and consented to searches of his home and car. The searches were conducted immediately. His apartment appeared normal. No signs of a struggle. Nothing out of place. His car contained only everyday items. Nothing suspicious. Neighbors said they hadn't heard anything unusual. No yelling. No sounds of a fight. Only that Dan returned home late, which matched his account. Investigators questioned him again, focusing on key details: the exact time they left the bar, where the car was parked, who got out first, whether they discussed plans for the next day, and whether any messages were exchanged afterward. Dan's answers stayed consistent. He emphasized that he cared for Rebecca and had no reason to harm her. He even agreed to take a polygraph test. The baseline questions caused no issues. But when asked the critical ones, the results showed signs of deception. Investigators noted these findings in their report, while also adding the usual disclaimer: a polygraph is only a tool for evaluating credibility, not hard proof of guilt. Investigators revisited the timeline carefully. Witnesses who had been at the bar that night all gave consistent statements about when the group split up, who left first, and that there had been no signs of conflict. Their accounts matched each other. A search around Rebecca's home turned up little. There were no surveillance cameras in the area. The yard was undisturbed. There was no solid basis to detain Dan. He remained listed as a person of interest, required to stay in touch and provide further information if needed. With no supporting evidence to tie him directly to Rebecca's disappearance, the case was officially marked as stalled. Late one night in Ridge, Long Island, a driver traveling along a remote, unlit road noticed a small fire smoldering near the roadside. He pulled over and immediately called emergency services. Coincidentally, a local firefighter, off-duty but carrying an extinguisher in his truck, happened to pass by at the same time. The two men approached the flames together, but quickly realized this wasn't just a brush fire. The firefighter reacted fast, directing his extinguisher in short bursts to smother the flames while trying to preserve potential evidence. Within moments, the nightmare became clear. A human body was burning. Police responded within minutes, closing down the road and sealing off the area. Floodlights illuminated the scene as investigators worked methodically. They documented the footprints of first responders so they could be ruled out later. There were no drag marks or blood outside the burn zone, suggesting the body had been transported there and set alight, likely an attempt to erase evidence. The condition of the remains made identification extraordinarily difficult. The body was badly charred, and nearly all clothing had been destroyed by fire. It had been tightly bound in sheets and plastic, secured with multiple layers of tape. The most severe burns were to the face and limbs. Investigators noted that fingers were missing, and both ears and the nose had been cut away. Even more disturbing, a section of skin appeared to have been deliberately excised from the back before the fire was set. Crime scene technicians followed strict forensic protocol. Every tire impression, shoe print was measured and logged, along with the suspected direction of travel. Forensic teams collected fragments of melted tape and plastic, soil samples from inside and outside the burn area, swabs from what remained of the wrapping materials. Each item was sealed, labeled, and entered into the chain of custody records. Meanwhile, dispatchers searched for surveillance cameras in the vicinity. None were mounted on utility poles nearby, and the closest private homes were too far away to have captured the scene. Investigators mapped possible routes from the nearest highways and considered where a vehicle might have turned around. The burn analysis suggested the fire had not been burning long, likely lit just minutes before the first witness arrived. A strong chemical odor hung in the air, pointing to an accelerant, though no fuel containers were recovered. After the scene was processed, the remains, still cocooned in layers of melted material, were carefully transported to the Suffolk County Medical Examiner's office. The victim's identity was still unknown. The case was assigned to Dr. Charles Kinner, a veteran forensic pathologist renowned for handling complex cases. He began the painstaking work of unwrapping the evidence layer by layer, meticulously documenting each step and enforcing strict contamination control. The unwrapping process began with the outermost layers. Wide photographs were taken first, followed by close-ups documenting every knot and fold. The sheets and plastic wrap were removed one at a time, each sealed in its own evidence envelope. Adhesive strips were lifted with tweezers and preserved on slides for fingerprint and fiber analysis. Fire extinguisher residue was rinsed only in select control areas to ensure it wouldn't contaminate surface particulates on the wrappings. With the materials removed, Dr. Kenner recorded the basic traits of the victim. Female, estimated age around 20. Average build. A precise rectangular section of skin was missing from the lower back. The edges were clean and deliberate, clearly excised with a sharp instrument. The placement suggested one chilling motive: the killer had attempted to conceal a tattoo that could identify her. Investigators built their first working theory around that finding. But honestly, missing persons databases were queried for young women in their early 20s with large lower back tattoos. The search began in Connecticut but yielded nothing. The radius was then expanded to neighboring states, including New York, with the assumption that the crime scene and the dump site might not be the same. Meanwhile, every piece of packaging was rushed to the lab. The tape was tested both for fingerprint recovery from the adhesive side and for DNA or fibers embedded in the interior layers. The plastic sheeting was examined for sweat, oil, trace fibers, or accelerant residue. Soil and soot samples from the burn site were preserved to compare later with any suspect vehicles or secondary locations. Kenner performed the internal exam with the same precision. Every injury was photographed with measurement scales and described in strict forensic terminology. He documented bruising, mapped burn patterns, and preserved indicators of blunt force trauma for later analysis. The teeth, remarkably intact despite the fire, stood out as a viable route for positive identification. The tattoo theory soon bore fruit. The expanded database flagged a possible match from Long Island, New York. Rebecca Coster, a 24-year-old woman, recently reported missing. Her file described her build, hair color, height, and crucially, a tattoo on her lower back. The very spot that had been removed from the unidentified body. The circumstantial details lined up, but only forensic confirmation would suffice. Rebecca's family was contacted and asked to provide her medical and dental records. Suffolk County Police hand-delivered the charts to Connecticut to prevent any chain of custody issues. The comparison was completed the following day. X-rays and dental records were laid against the remains. Crown shapes, fillings, and root structures all matched perfectly. The conclusion was irrefutable. The body found burning on the roadside was Rebecca Coster. Then came the most agonizing step of all: notifying the family. Detectives drove to Barbara and Larry's home. Larry phoned his wife at work, warning her that officers were already waiting at the door. When Barbara arrived and saw two plainclothes detectives standing there, she knew immediately. Before they could say anything, the reaction was immediate and devastating. Barbara ran into the street, screaming that her daughter was dead, her anguish echoing through the neighborhood. Neighbors stood frozen as they watched her collapse under the weight of unbearable grief. For their family, the moment marked a brutal turning point. Hope dissolved into a crushing, irreversible loss. With Rebecca's identity confirmed, investigators entered the next phase, retracing her final hours, her last conversations, and the sinister path that led to her death. Digital forensics offered the first breakthrough. Phone records showed that after Rebecca's routine goodnight message at 3:30 a.m., she received 2 calls from the same number, carrying a 617 area code. The first lasted nearly 15 minutes, beginning at 4:10 am. The second, just minutes later at 4:27 am, was short. After that, her phone went permanently silent. The number was traced to a prepaid burner phone, unregistered, barely used, and activated only days earlier. Cell tower data placed the phone traveling east toward Rebecca's neighborhood during that crucial window. The sequence was chilling. She returned home, spoke for a long stretch with the mysterious caller, took a brief follow-up call, and then vanished from all communication. Detectives soon connected the dots. On Jennifer's phone, the friend who had been uneasy about the stranger at the bar, one recent contact stood out: James Brown, also from the 617 area code. Forensic analysis confirmed that this was the same number that had called Rebecca in her final hour. The anonymous man from the bar had lured her in and followed up that night. Bar surveillance footage filled in more gaps. Reviewing the video, investigators saw Rebecca laughing with friends, later slipping into a quiet moment alone. The exact time the man Jennifer described approached her. His focus was clear, his presence undeniable. The decisive break came from the crime scene itself. Forensic analysts managed to recover 2 usable thumbprints from the adhesive side of the duct tape used to bind Rebecca's body. Despite the fire damage, the prints were intact enough for a database search. The name returned was Evans Gantier. Gantier's history raised immediate alarms. He had prior police encounters that never escalated to convictions. He was aggressive towards women. There were complaints from neighbors of violent arguments. Now officially identified, Gantier became the focus of round-the-clock surveillance. Detectives tracked him to the Bronx, staking out the home of his girlfriend. A pickup truck was parked outside. The following morning, when Gantier emerged and got into the vehicle, officers moved in, boxing him in, and placing him under arrest. A search of the apartment and basement, conducted with Gantier's signed consent, revealed unsettling evidence. Paint rollers, brushes, trays, and buckets of fresh paint stood alongside containers of heavy cleaning agents. The basement walls and floor bore roller marks where a new coat of paint had hastily covered something, a cleanup attempt written across the surface. Someone had gone to great lengths to erase what had happened there. The pickup was transported to a forensic lab for a full inspection. Special attention was given to the center console and the area between the driver's seat and the floorboard. There, analysts found dried reddish stains that trailed downward toward the floor. Trace amounts were also detected on the lower portion of the front seat and the floor mat. All samples were carefully swabbed, packaged with control swabs, and thoroughly labeled for lab analysis. Additional samples were collected from the vehicle, including fibers from the seat fabric, fine particles from crevices in the center console, and a small patch of harsh-smelling cleaning agent that had been applied to a piece of plastic, likely in an attempt to mask or destroy residue. No matching evidence was found in the trunk, but tire impressions were taken, and the floor mats were sealed for soil analysis. A preliminary test confirmed the presence of blood near the base of the console. DNA analysis later matched it to Rebecca Coster, consistent with her known profile. Following his arrest, Evans agreed to speak with investigators and claimed he was ready to tell the truth. According to him, Rebecca's death was accidental. He said they met at a bar, and later he called her and invited her to come over. She agreed and willingly got into his vehicle. From that point on, his version of events became a series of implausible justifications. He claimed that during the drive, Rebecca suddenly began having trouble breathing and foaming at the mouth. He said he helped her out of the car and brought her into the basement to get her some water. Once inside, he claimed she slipped and fell onto a set of dumbbells, hitting her head on the concrete. According to Evans, she began bleeding heavily and died shortly after. He insisted he panicked and didn't call emergency services because he believed no one would believe it was an accident. He said he decided to hide what happened, wrapping her body in plastic and fabric, securing it with tape, and leaving it in the basement. A few hours later, he moved the body into his truck and drove to the ferry terminal in Port Jefferson. From there, he crossed into Connecticut and continued driving until he found a remote road near Stonington. He claimed he placed the body by the roadside, poured gasoline over it, and set it on fire, hoping it would destroy the evidence. But his story didn't hold up. Medical examiners found no signs of a fatal head injury, no skull fractures, and no internal bleeding. Instead, they documented stab wounds to the liver and neck, all inflicted while the victim was still alive. These findings directly contradicted his claim of a fall. Additionally, his explanation failed to account for the missing fingers and the removed patch of skin from Rebecca's lower back. Why would someone who witnessed an accidental death go to such extreme lengths to erase the victim's identity? The timeline didn't align either. Evans claimed all the blood loss occurred in the basement. Yet forensic tests showed blood traces in the vehicle's front cabin. This indicated Rebecca was already injured before or while she was in the car, contradicting his version of events. Ultimately, Evans's story appeared to be a calculated effort to distance himself from the actual act of violence, framing it as an accident and focusing only on what he described as a panicked cover-up. The forensic report provided the final, indisputable answers. Dr. Kenner laid out the findings based solely on the evidence. The key conclusion: death resulted from sharp force trauma to critical areas of the body, causing extensive blood loss. In the abdominal cavity, a large volume of clotted blood was found, soaking the surrounding tissues. This indicated that the heart was still beating at the time of the injury. Blood was actively flowing into the wound and pooling internally. The bleeding originated from a deep laceration to the liver, consistent with a stab wound. The pattern and separation of blood within the cavity confirmed it had occurred while the heart was functioning. Such internal blood layering would not be possible if cardiac activity had ceased immediately. Puncture wounds were also found in the neck's soft tissue, along with evidence of air entering the venous system. Examination of the heart revealed a gas-blood mixture, a clear sign of an air embolism. This occurs when air enters a damaged vein and travels to the right side of the heart. It explained the rapid fatality despite preserved breathing and blood pressure, suggesting Rebecca was still breathing when those neck injuries were inflicted. The fire was ruled out as a cause of death. There was no soot or combustion residue in the lungs, which meant she was not breathing during the fire. Toxicology filled in the rest of the timeline. Although she had consumed alcohol earlier that night, there was no trace of it left in her bloodstream. Her body had already metabolized the alcohol, indicating several hours had passed between the time she left the bar and the moment of death. A time frame that matched the timestamp of the late-night calls. The expert's conclusion was unequivocal. This was a violent death resulting from multiple stab wounds inflicted while the victim was alive. Medical evidence completely disproved the theory of an accidental injury. The district attorney charged Evans Ganthier with second-degree murder and additional counts related to the concealment and destruction of evidence. The defense argued that while there had been poor decisions and panic, there was no proof of intent to kill. They highlighted the lack of direct witnesses, the missing murder weapon, and questioned the forensic interpretation, suggesting alternative explanations for the trauma. But the prosecution focused on the physical evidence. Barbara attended court every single day. She listened quietly, without outward displays of emotion, only speaking when the court asked about her daughter's habits or background, details needed for context. Even when graphic photos from the vehicle and forensic reports were presented, she remained in the courtroom, never stepping out or interrupting the proceedings. Her presence left a deep impression on everyone. The family was committed to seeing justice through Ezra. No matter how painful. During sentencing, the judge addressed not only the act of taking a life, but also the disturbing efforts to conceal it afterward. He emphasized that these actions showed a deliberate attempt to erase the victim's identity and rob her family of the truth. He used the term inhumane acts to describe the level of cruelty involved. It took the jury only a few hours to reach a verdict. The sentence handed down was at the upper end of the legal range. 25 years to life in prison. The judge explained that this length reflected both the severity of the crime and the defendant's ongoing denial, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. Evans Ganthier remains incarcerated at the maximum security Greenhaven Prison in Stormville, New York. He will be eligible for parole on February 4, 2035. In her final statement, Barbara thanked everyone who had worked on the case and brought it to trial. The verdict gave her a measure of peace, knowing that the man responsible would never walk free or hurt anyone else. Still, she made it clear that no sentence could bring her daughter back or truly heal the wound. Barbara said she could not and would not forgive the person who caused such deep and permanent pain to her family. The trial may have ended with a legal conclusion, but for Rebecca's loved ones, it marked only the beginning of a lifelong journey through grief and absence. On a bright spring afternoon in Toronto, office workers strolled out for lunch. Students hurried between classes, and families enjoyed the sunshine. Within minutes, the sidewalks turned into a killing ground. A white rental van tore through the crowds, leaving behind a trail of shattered bodies, scattered shoes, and silence broken by screams. 10 lives were lost, 16 more scarred forever. Alec, however, showed no sign of remorse. He wasn't drunk, high, or fleeing the police. Instead, he calmly told investigators that his attack was part of a greater cause. An incel uprising meant, who was Alec Minassian? And how did a lonely young man from suburban Canada come to see mass murder as a path to glory? To understand, we need to step inside the disturbing world of incels, where rejection festers into rage, and rage can turn fatally violent. Incel, short for involuntary celibate, refers primarily to men who long for romantic or intimacy partners but are unable to find them. Many incels blame women for their situation, feeling rejected not just by them but by society as a whole. Interestingly, the movement was originally founded by a Canadian woman named Alana. Elliot Rodger, a 22-year-old, became the symbol of the incel movement after he murdered 6 people in Isla Vista, near the University of California, Santa Barbara. In 2014, he described his crimes as revenge against the women who had rejected and ignored him. In a video uploaded shortly before the massacre, Rodger declared that he had never even been kissed and felt he had been unfairly deprived of the experience's intimate, fun, pleasure that he believed were a normal part of college life. He vowed to punish women for not being attracted to him. Tragically, he carried out his plan, killing 6 people before taking his own life. While the public overwhelmingly sympathized with the victims' families, a small minority disturbingly praised Rodger's actions. Alec Minassian, the central figure of today's story, was not only a member of the online incel community, but also reportedly idolized Elliot Rodger. This connection is crucial, as Alec appeared to be inspired by Rodger's violence and sought to continue what he saw as the incel uprising. Alec Minassian was born on November 3, 1992, in Richmond Hill, Canada, just outside Toronto. He lived with his parents and older brother in what seemed like a stable and comfortable home. His father, an Armenian immigrant, worked as a software developer, while his mother, originally from Iran, held a job in IT. The family owned a suburban house and appeared content. Yet Alec's personal reality was different. From a young age, he was described as a quiet and sensitive child who struggled to understand social cues. He avoided eye contact, found conversations difficult, and often felt awkward in social situations due to his communication challenges. These difficulties carried over into adulthood. At school, Alec struggled to fit in. He often played alone and rarely interacted with classmates. He disliked attention, becoming visibly upset when teachers called on him or asked him to speak in front of the class. The prospect of presenting at the blackboard terrified him so much that he would sometimes flee the classroom. Even praise made him uncomfortable. It seemed he was not only unable but also unwilling to engage with other children. If Alec was denied something he wanted, he would throw tantrums, sometimes running off and banging his head against the wall. He rarely smiled or laughed, and life appeared to be a constant struggle for him. After years of difficulty, his parents finally sought professional help. Alec was diagnosed with pervasive developmental disorder, a now outdated diagnostic category once used to describe children who displayed some symptoms of autism spectrum disorder or Asperger's syndrome. In middle school, Alec attended special education classes for children with autism, but the program brought little progress. His struggles continued into high school, especially with communication and social interaction, which made him a target for bullying. Other students mocked him because he stood out as different. The bullying worsened due to Alec's unusual physical behaviors, such as rocking back and forth, tapping objects, spitting on his hands and rubbing them together, or pulling his shirt over his head and spitting inside it. At times, he would circle around classmates, growl or meow at them, and even try to bite. This odd behavior earned him the nickname Chewbacca. After the Star Wars character, the teasing became so common that many students didn't even know his real name. Despite the ridicule, Alec often failed to recognize he was being mocked. He misread social cues and assumed that classmates genuinely enjoyed his growling or meowing, so he repeated it more often, unintentionally fueling the bullying further. Throughout his school years, Alec remained isolated and lonely. He had no close friends and kept to himself. After school, he would retreat to his bedroom, spending most of his time alone. Another painful obstacle soon emerged: girls. In high school, Alec couldn't bring himself to speak to female classmates and could barely make eye contact. If a girl looked at him or tried to start a conversation, he would freeze, completely silent. When other boys discussed their crushes, Alec felt awkward and out of place, which drew even more unwanted attention. Sometimes, bullies forced him to approach girls as a joke. These encounters ended with him blushing, stuttering, and panicking, all to the amusement of his peers. Over time, Alec developed a deep fear of women, linking them directly to the humiliation he endured at school. He often rocked back, forth and muttered that he disliked girls. If a female classmate came near, he recoiled and shouted for her not to hurt him. This fear extended outside the classroom as well. His social world had become one of constant rejection. Motseri, graduating from high school, was a huge relief for Alec. The bullying had scarred him deeply, pushing him further into isolation. He rarely left home, too anxious to face the outside world. Instead, he locked himself in his room, turning to video games and the internet for comfort. Online spaces became his refuge, giving him a sense of safety and control. But this reliance on virtual interaction would eventually play a darker role in his life. His passion for computers and gaming inspired him to study computer programming. Alec enrolled in a college in Toronto, close to home, where he excelled academically. Computers became his lifeline. He could talk endlessly about programming. Even began making friends who shared his interests. For the first time, Alec felt like he belonged. He raised his hand in class, answered questions, and spoke confidently in front of groups. Major achievements considering his high school struggles. For several years, life seemed to be improving, but the old anxieties surrounding women returned, sending him into another downward spiral. In October 2013, just weeks before his 21st birthday and during his third year of college, Alec became preoccupied with relationships. Despite his growing social skills and friendships, he still felt completely lost when it came to women. He finally gathered the courage to ask a female classmate for her number. But when she ignored his texts, it was a crushing rejection. Still, Alec tried again. Determined to connect with someone, he attended a Halloween party, hoping to meet a girl and flirt. He nervously approached a group of young women, but they began laughing at him. Humiliated, he froze. Soon after, a group of tall, athletic men walked in. According to Alec, the girls quickly shifted their attention to them, touching their muscles and giggling at their jokes, completely ignoring him. He left the Halloween party seething with anger, convinced the world was stacked against him. Why, he wondered, were girls only attracted to tall, muscular, arrogant men, while ignoring someone like him, kind, intelligent, and polite? Why did they always laugh at him? All he wanted was to flirt a little, to hold someone, to be kissed. But instead, he walked away, humiliated once again. That night became a turning point. The bitterness festered, and his view of women soured. In many ways, That party marked the beginning of Alec Manassian's descent into the world of inceldom. Obsessed with these thoughts, Alec turned to the internet, desperately searching for others who felt the same way, for young men who complained that women never noticed them, never dated them, never gave them a chance. That's when he stumbled upon incel forums. The word incel, short for involuntary celibate. Over time, however, the label has been co-opted by online communities with deeply toxic beliefs. Incels argue they are forced into celibacy by a society that unfairly favors attractive, wealthy, or confident men. Their bitterness often escalates into open hatred of women and fantasies of revenge against a world they believe has rejected them. The ideology even comes with its own vocabulary. In incel slang, only 20% of men are considered desirable. These are the so-called chads, the tall, muscular, confident men who supposedly have unlimited access to women. The women they attract are known as Stacies, conventionally attractive girls who, in incel thinking, only want chads. Ordinary people of average looks and income are called normies, and incels resent them as well, believing normies also reject them. At the very bottom of this imagined hierarchy are the incels themselves, the omega or beta males who insist women will never choose them. No matter what they do, most incels don't attempt to change their circumstances. They dismiss self-improvement as pointless, blaming their struggles entirely on genetics, appearance, and the supposed cruelty of women. Many believe they are owed intimacy, and that women, especially feminists, have ruined society by exercising choice in partners. Some even claim that every day a woman refuses them intimacy is a form of reverse assault, as damaging as physical violence, beneath the self-pity. However, lies something more dangerous. The forums seethe with misogyny, violent fantasies, and calls for revenge. Real crimes have emerged from these spaces. It was here, in these toxic corners of the internet, that Alec Manassian finally found a community that seemed to understand him. In January 2014, he encountered a post that left a deep impression. It was written by Elliot Rodger, the self-described supreme gentleman who, months later, I would kill 6 people near the University of California, Santa Barbara. Alec was so struck by Rodger's words that he reached out with a private message, and the two began corresponding. To Alec, Elliot seemed like a kindred spirit, someone who had suffered the same humiliations, someone who truly understood, despite living in different countries. They even discussed meeting in person. By spring of that year, Rodger's messages had taken a darker turn. He hinted at an important mission, telling Alec he might not survive, but that his actions would inspire others. He spoke of an uprising, of striking back at the women who ignored him and the society that rejected him. Alec encouraged him, wishing his friend luck, unaware of just how bloody that mission would be. 3 days later, on May 23, 2014, 22-year-old Elliot Rodger launched a rampage in Isla Vista, California, murdering 6 people and injuring 14 others before killing himself. Hours earlier, he had uploaded a chilling manifesto and video online, explaining his revenge plan, saying women would die for rejecting him and successful men would pay for their status. To the outside world, he was a monster, but inside the darkest corners of the internet, Rodger was hailed as a martyr. To incels, he was the supreme gentleman who had struck the first blow in what they fantasized would be an uprising. Alec Manassian openly said he was proud of Rodger's mission. Incel forums glorified Rodger, and Alec soaked it up. A year later, Alec struck up an online friendship with another disillusioned young man, Christopher Harper Mercer, also known as Chris. In the fall of 2015, Chris, lonely, angry, and obsessed with Rodger's legacy, armed himself and stormed into Umpqua Community College in Roseburg, Oregon. On October 1, he gunned down 9 people, injured 9 more, and then turned the weapon on himself. Another incel, another bloodbath. Once again, Alec had a personal connection to the killer. Watching his friends elevated to hero status in incel circles planted a dangerous seed. Alec wanted that same glory. He fantasized about a world where incels would overthrow the so-called Chads and Stacys, Zaitse power, and finally be recognized as society's rightful rulers. His resentment hardened into obsession. Meanwhile, his personal life was unraveling. Over the next 6 years, he drifted in and out of college, unable to finish a degree or hold down steady work. His parents, frustrated with his aimlessness, eventually urged him to enlist in the army. For a brief moment, it seemed like a turning point. Alec passed the entry tests, left his parents' home, and began training in Quebec. But it didn't last. The discipline of military life broke him. He stumbled constantly. His nervous tic drew ridicule. He failed even basic tasks, like making his bed or shining his boots. Other recruits mocked him. His instructors quickly realized he wasn't fit to handle a firearm. He could barely handle himself. 16 days into training, Alec fell ill with tonsillitis and was sent home. The military washed their hands of him. To Alec, it was another crushing rejection. Another reminder that the world didn't want him. By 25, he returned to college, only 1 semester from graduating. But something had shifted. He was angrier now, quicker to lash out. Once shy and withdrawn, he began picking fights with classmates. One student later recalled Alec bragging that he had left the army because they wouldn't let him use weapons as much as he wanted. The shy boy, who once only dreamed of being noticed, had grown into a man simmering with rage. Rage that was about to explode. During his final semester of college, Alec sank deeper into the incel community. At 25 years old, he had never been on a date. Years of rejection and isolation had hardened into bitterness. Now, he dreamed of becoming a legend within incel circles, like Elliot Rodger and Christopher Harper Mercer. He began to plan how he might achieve that notoriety. On April 19, 2018, Alec finally graduated from college, earning his diploma after 7 long years. Just days later, he set his horrific plan into motion. On April 22, 2018, he posted on an incel forum that the beta male uprising would begin the next day. He urged others to join his rebellion and help overthrow what he saw as an unjust society. Many forum members praised him, and Alec basked in the attention. Alec truly believed incels needed to rise up and take revenge for their failed lives, a belief he was about to turn into action. Around noon on April 23, 2018, Alec arrived at a Ryder truck rental in Toronto. Because he had no access to firearms, he decided a vehicle would be his weapon. He deliberately chose a mid-sized vehicle and told the staff he needed it to move out of college. The rental company checked his background, but nothing raised suspicion about the quiet, newly minted graduate. That day, Alec approached the counter, received the keys, and awkwardly asked the clerk to show him how to start the van. The employees chuckled. Most had never met a customer who couldn't start a vehicle. Alec then sat in the driver's seat for nearly 20 minutes, going over the details of his plan. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone and posted a chilling message. The incel uprising had begun. He said he will overthrow all the Chads and Stacys. Long live the supreme gentleman Elliot Rodger. Moments later, he started the engine and drove away. The white van headed past the university where Alec had studied and toward Toronto's busy Yonge Street. It was Monday, April 23rd, a bright spring day. People were strolling on lunch breaks, running errands, or walking with children. Yonge Street, one of the city's busiest thoroughfares, was lined with shops, restaurants, and theaters. Its wide sidewalks were crowded as usual. For most, it was an ordinary weekday. But that was about to change. At 1:24 p.m., Alec ran a red light at a bustling intersection, honking at other cars, before swerving onto the curb and plowing onto the sidewalk. The wide pedestrian path was packed with people. He pressed the accelerator, slammed into a crowd, killing one person instantly and injuring several others, but he didn't stop. He pressed harder on the gas, steering the van straight into anyone in his path. Panic erupted. Screams echoed as people scattered, trying to dodge the oncoming van. Some leapt into the street, narrowly avoiding being crushed. Drivers slammed on their brakes, watching in horror. A few rushed to help the injured, pulling dazed pedestrians to safety. Others froze, unable to comprehend the unfolding carnage. Still, Alec pressed on. He drove at high speed, striking everything in his path. He knocked down poles, smashed bus shelters, and eventually reached Mel Lastman Square, another busy area, where he barreled into yet another crowd. Emergency dispatchers were overwhelmed with frantic calls from witnesses. On Yonge Street, where the rampage began, drivers abandoned their cars to help the wounded. Bodies lay face down on the pavement, and no one knew who was still alive. Alec Manassian drove for nearly a mile, zigzagging between the road and sidewalk, deliberately steering toward anyone in his path. Witnesses later described the sound of bodies striking metal, a sound they would never forget. By the time the van finally came to a stop, the street resembled a war zone. Shoes, bags, and shattered glass littered the pavement alongside broken bodies. Some victims were motionless, others writhed in agony, and strangers rushed to perform CPR on the injured and innocents, and the rampage lasted only 10 minutes but felt like an eternity for those trapped on Yonge Street. The first police officer to arrive on foot tried desperately to help as many victims as possible. But the scene was overwhelming. He found a woman lying face down and gently turned her over, searching for signs of life. Moving quickly from one body to the next, he attempted to give first aid wherever he could. Nearby store and pharmacy workers rushed outside with anything that might help. Bandages, medications, towels. Yet for many, the injuries were simply too severe to survive. Meanwhile, Alec Manassian realized his rented van was too damaged to continue, and the vehicle stalled. The rampage had come to an end, but Alec, still consumed by his violent fantasies, he stepped out of the van and immediately confronted a police officer. The officer drew his gun, pointed it at Alec, and shouted for him to get on the ground with his hands behind his head. Alec refused to comply. Instead, he reached into his back pocket, hoping the officer would mistake it for a weapon and shoot him. Granting him the martyr's death, he wanted an errand, but the officer stayed composed. It quickly became clear to the officer that Alec was unarmed. He returned to his patrol car, switched on the siren, and ordered Alec once again to surrender. But Alec had not carried out a mass killing just to give up. He wanted to die in what he believed would be glory. Pulling a black wallet from his pocket, he pointed it at the officer as though it were a gun, still hoping the officer would fire. The officer, however, to remain steady, and told him no one else needed to be hurt. In frustration, Alec shouted for the officer to kill him on the spot. The officer refused to be provoked. Calmly holding his position, he holstered his gun, drew his baton, and began walking directly toward Alec. At that moment, Alec's resolve collapsed. Fear overtook him, and he raised his hands in surrender. Within seconds, he was handcuffed and taken into custody. The incel-inspired rampage led by Alec Manassian lasted only 7 minutes, including the tense standoff with the officer. Yet in that brief span of time, he managed to unleash destruction and claim multiple innocent lives. In total, Alec Manassian had killed 10 people and injured 16 more, most of them women. Fitting his incel-fueled desire for revenge, following his arrest, paramedics established a makeshift emergency station on Yonge Street. Subway and bus services across Toronto were suspended, and nearby businesses were forced to close. Authorities feared the attack might be part of a larger, coordinated plot. At first, Investigators were unsure of the motive. But within minutes of the arrest, the truth surfaced. By checking his online activity, they identified Alek Minassian and discovered his social media posts. His name and face spread quickly across the news, and it was revealed that he was a self-proclaimed incel. Emergency responders soon confirmed the toll. 10 innocent lives lost. The victims included Renuka Amarasinghe, 45, a single mother who left behind a 7-year-old son, and Marie D'Amico, 30, an investment firm employee, Chulmin Edikang, 45, a chef from South Korea, Betty Forsyth, 94, a cancer survivor, beloved in her community, Dorothy Sewell, 80, a grandmother known as the rock of her family, Munir Nijar, 85, who had traveled from Jordan to visit relatives, Zohee Chung, 22, a University of Toronto student, Ji-hun Kim, 22, a student from South Korea, Andrea Braden, 33, a devoted aunt adored by her nieces and nephews, and Geraldine Brady, 83, a cherished wife, mother, and grandmother. All of them were ordinary people simply going about their daily lives on that Monday afternoon. In addition to the 10 killed, 16 others suffered serious injuries, concussions, spinal trauma, broken bones, and in some cases, amputations. Their lives were permanently altered, and beyond the physical wounds, countless others endured deep emotional and psychological scars. This was precisely what Alek Minassian intended when he got behind the wheel of that white van, not just to kill, but to spread terror and lasting pain. After the tragedy that devastated Toronto's streets, the incel community shockingly celebrated Alek Minassian's actions. They reveled in the fact that 10 innocent people had been killed, 8 of them women. To them, this was not a crime but an achievement. Some even debated how many beers should be drunk in honor of each woman killed. Within their circles, Alek Minassian was given the grotesque nickname Saint Alek, and songs praising his attack were uploaded to YouTube. During his interrogation at the police station, Alek appeared detached and almost emotionless. He expressed no regret and spoke with a disturbing casualness, as if he were describing a bowling game where the pins had suddenly turned into people. In truth, he was proud of what he had done. He calmly explained his plan to investigators and even traced its origins back to a 2013 Halloween party, where a group of girls mocked his clumsy attempts at flirting. According to him, that humiliation sparked the resentment that would later explode on Toronto's busiest street. Alek vented his bitterness toward women, claiming no one had ever shown interest in him despite his belief that he was intelligent and attractive. Then he shared the incel community's ideology with the officers, explaining who Chads and Stacys were and why they needed to be toppled from their pedestal. He admitted to having friendly correspondence with Elliot Rodger and Christopher Harper Mercer and supporting their militant beliefs. In the months that followed, Alek remained in jail awaiting trial. His trial finally began in November 2020, 2.5 years after the attack. His defense team argued that he should not be held criminally responsible because autism had distorted his perception of reality and influenced his decision-making. But the court rejected this claim. Evidence showed that Alek was intelligent, fully aware of his actions, and capable of distinguishing right from wrong. His disorder did not absolve him of responsibility. Ultimately, he was found guilty of 10 counts of murder and 16 counts of attempted murder. Alek Minassian was sentenced to 10 life sentences to be served concurrently, with 25 years of probation. In the aftermath of the tragedy, a memorial was built near Yonge Street to honor the victims. Lawsuits soon followed against both Alek Minassian and the Ryder Truck Rental Company. Among those seeking damages was Amir, a chemistry professor who suffered a traumatic brain injury, multiple spinal fractures, memory loss, and depression. He sought $6 million in compensation. Catherine, another survivor, filed a $3 $6 million lawsuit after sustaining a brain injury, a collapsed lung, and fractures to her spine, pelvis, and ribs. The family of Anne-Marie D'Amico, one of the murdered victims, filed a $1 million claim, intending to donate any compensation to the Anne-Marie Fund, a charity supporting women who are victims of violence. Amaresh Tesfamariam, Anurse, filed the largest claim, $14 million. After being left paralyzed from the neck down and dependent on a ventilator, tragically, she never recovered and died in October 2021, more than 3 years after the attack, effectively becoming the 11th victim of Alec Manassian's crime. The incel subculture, instead of encouraging self-improvement, often cultivates bitterness and a dangerous tendency to blame women for personal failures. While violent acts by incels are relatively rare, the community has a troubling record of glorifying perpetrators rather than condemning them. This toxic ideology can have devastating consequences. As Alec Manassian's case so painfully illustrates, it is important to recognize that no one becomes an incel overnight. The path is often paved with years of loneliness, rejection, and feelings of inadequacy. Vulnerable young men, disillusioned by their experiences with relationships, may stumble upon these online forums. There, instead of finding healing, they encounter echo chambers that validate their anger and despair, pushing them deeper into radicalization. For Alec Manassian, this virtual world fueled his resentment, transforming it into a desire for vengeance against a society he felt had mocked and rejected him. On February 9, 1999, in a desolate park on the outskirts of Baltimore, a man pulled his car over to the side of the road after drinking beer. He went into the bushes just to use the restroom, but was met with a sight that left him speechless. Apale, cold foot sticking out of a shallow grave. Police arrived quickly and discovered the body of a young woman buried in a shallow grave. Strangulation marks on her neck suggested she had died of violence. The victim was identified as Hae Min Lee, an 18-year-old high school student who had gone missing nearly a month earlier. The girl who once radiated with a bright smile and a wide-open future is now nothing more than a corpse beneath the cold earth. For her family, the fragile ray of hope had faded, giving way to endless grief. For the Baltimore community, this was not just a murder, but the beginning of a legal tragedy, a maze of truth and lies that would last for more than 2 decades. Who buried Hae Min's youth? Who cut short her promising future? And most importantly, was justice truly served? Or did it all lead to a controversial verdict? To this day, these questions haunt the world. Hae Min Lee was born on October 15, 1990, in South Korea. Her mother, Yeon Kim, raised her and her brother Young Lee with determination and care. In 1992, when Hae Min was 11, the family made a life-changing move to the United States. They settled in Maryland and stayed with her grandparents from an early age, and stood out. She excelled academically and athletically, joining an advanced academic program near Baltimore and thriving both in the classroom and on the field. She became a talented athlete, playing lacrosse and hockey with skill and passion. By her teenage years, she was known as bright, mature, and independent. At 17, she worked part-time at an optician's office, balancing school, sports, and work with impressive discipline. In April 1998, Hae Min began dating a classmate, Adnan Shed. He was born in the United States to conservative Pakistani Muslim parents. Although his family's traditions forbade dating, alcohol, and banned substances, he sometimes broke those rules in secret. On the surface, he seemed like a model American teenager, well-liked, a football player, on the track team, and trained as an emergency medical technician. He was popular at school, and peers described him as charming and easy to get along with. Their relationship unfolded like many high school romances, sweet histories, emotional ups and downs, and breakups followed by reconciliations. In her diary, Hae-min described Adnan as sweet and caring, recalling moments like when he surprised her with a rose during class. But religion soon cast a shadow over their bond. Adnan confided that loving her felt like a sin within his faith. The conflict came to a head on Halloween night, when his parents found out and reacted publicly. Hae-min ended the relationship the next day, but just a few weeks later, they were back together. By November, they were dating again, and Hae-min wrote that she still loved him. Adnan would visit her at the optician's office where she worked. By December, however, Hae-min's feelings began to shift. She developed an interest in Don Kleindienst, a 22-year-old co-worker whose mother managed the optical shop. Don was supportive, kind, and mature. He admired Hae-min's confidence, and she felt drawn to him in a way she hadn't experienced before. In her writings, she admitted feeling torn between the two. Adnan knew Hae-min was uncertain, and the cultural and religious differences only added to her confusion. Hae-min wanted a relationship where she could be herself, one that was open and included her partner's family, without secrecy or shame. She had never told her own relatives about Adnan, and over time she felt she was losing part of herself. By mid-December, she ended the relationship with Adnan. Soon after, she began dating Don, who offered the stability and openness she wanted. Entering her senior year, with a promising new love and excellent academic performance, her future seemed bright. But within weeks, everything changed. On January 13, 1999, Hae-min was seen leaving school around 2:15 p.m. She got into her car, planning to pick up her younger cousin from daycare by 3:15 a.m. and then go to work. It was a routine day, but she never made it. She vanished without a trace. For someone as responsible as Hae-min, disappearing was unthinkable. Her family quickly realized something was wrong and contacted the police. That evening, around 6:30 a.m., investigators spoke with Adnan, who said the last time he saw her was earlier at school. They also questioned Don, who said he had been at work from 9 o'clock a.m. to 6 o'clock p.m. and hadn't seen her that day. Authorities expressed deep concern. Hae-min had no history of family conflict, no reason to run away, and no signs of trouble in her life. Her sudden disappearance was alarming and marked the beginning of a mystery that would shake her community and haunt those who knew her. In the days and weeks that followed, the lack of answers plunged her mother into profound anguish. Each day without news made the silence heavier. Nearly 4 weeks after Hae-min disappeared, on February 9, a shocking call reached the police. A local resident had found what looked like a human foot partially buried in a shallow grave. Police rushed to the scene in a large forest park and discovered a body. The location already had a dark history. It wasn't the first time a body had been buried there. Before long, investigators confirmed the worst fears of Hae-min's family. It was her. She was just 18 years old. The autopsy determined the cause of death was manual strangulation, a finding that made the crime even more harrowing. The news spread quickly. The community held vigils and expressed grief for a young woman gone too soon. Police first investigated the man who found the body. He said he stopped the car after drinking beer, went into the forest to use the restroom, and accidentally saw the horrifying scene. His testimony was checked, and nothing suspicious was found. Next, they looked into Hae-min's new boyfriend, Don Kleindienst. His work records placed him at his job from morning to evening that day. Again, no suspicious evidence was found. Just as the investigation seemed to stall, an anonymous call shifted its direction. The caller gave police a name, Adnan Shade. The caller implicated Adnan as the killer and said he had threatened Hae-min. Detectives began reconstructing the relationship between Hae-min and Adnan. Friends offered a mixed picture. Some said Adnan sometimes felt Hae-min didn't love him enough. Others recalled that she found him controlling and disliked being told what to do. Her independent nature clashed with his expectations. Stephanie, a close friend, said Adnan hadn't expected Heyman to leave him for someone else. In her diary, Heyman wrote that the breakup had been hard for him to accept. She wrote that she once loved him. So why did the feelings change so quickly? A question many adolescents might ask themselves. Some friends saw a darker side. In early December, Adnan was jealous and paranoid, often asking if she was being unfaithful. Investigators were particularly alarmed by a note found among Heyman's belongings in which Adnan threatened to kill her, consistent with what the anonymous caller had reported. Yet, there were contradictions. Around the holidays, Heyman and Adnan exchanged Christmas gifts and even helped each other when their cars broke down, gestures suggesting they were on decent terms. Detectives considered that Adnan might have believed they would eventually reconcile as they had before. By New Year's Day, however, Heyman was moving on. She went on her first official date with Dawn. Detectives believed Adnan may not have realized the seriousness of that relationship until January 5. When he first learned about Dawn, to understand more, they pulled Adnan's phone records and reviewed his calls from that day. One name stood out: Jennifer. At first, her account seemed routine, but the next day, she returned with a lawyer, and her story changed dramatically. Jennifer claimed that Adnan had spent time with his friend Jay on the day Heyman disappeared, and that Jay had told her Adnan killed Heyman. This gave police a new lead. They brought Jay in for questioning. Jay said Adnan had talked about killing Heyman, especially after learning about Dawn. She described Adnan as someone who wasn't used to losing. While Jay said she hadn't initially taken the talk seriously, detectives believed it revealed a dangerous mindset. Pressure on Adnan mounted with another detail that might have stoked his anger. On January 9, just days before her death, Heyman updated her social media profile, publicly declaring Dawn the new love of her life. On January 12, the day before the crime, Adnan got a new cell phone. The contract wasn't in his name, but in a friend's name from the mosque. That night, he called several people to share his new number, including multiple attempts to reach Heyman. For investigators, this became another piece in a growing puzzle. By February 28, 1999, 6 weeks after Heyman's disappearance, police arrested Adnan. At a press conference afterward, prosecutors described Adnan's relationship with Heyman and suggested that the motive may have been blind infatuation. The arrest shocked Baltimore's Muslim community. Many who knew Adnan said it was impossible. They described him as kind, respectful, devout, and with no history of violence or crime. Some believed police, under intense pressure to solve the case, had targeted the wrong person. Heyman's family, however, had no doubt. Her mother, devastated by the loss, wanted justice and believed only a harsh sentence for Adnan would provide it. Adnan, for his part, has steadfastly maintained his innocence. He said that on the afternoon Heyman disappeared, he was at the library with a girl named Asia McLean. He insisted he would never have harmed Heyman, claiming he still loved and respected her. When detectives pressed him about the calls the night before, Adnan said Heyman had called him to ask for reconciliation. Investigators doubted this. Heyman wouldn't have known his new number so quickly. She only wrote it in her diary after that call. Her final diary entry, written after spending the day with Dawn, expressed how much she loved her new boyfriend. To detectives, reconciliation seemed highly unlikely. Adnan was formally charged with first-degree murder. In March, Jay was questioned again, and his statements went further. He claimed Adnan confessed to the killing and that he helped bury Heyman's body. According to Jay, after committing the crime, Adnan called him, picked him up, and showed him Heyman's body in the trunk. In a major development, Jay led police to Heyman's car, which had been missing. This discovery strengthened the prosecution's case. At trial in early 2000, the prosecution relied heavily on two elements: cell tower records placing Adnan's phone near the park that night, and Jay's testimony. But Jay's story wasn't perfectly consistent. While the core details stayed the same, he changed timelines, including when Adnan supposedly called him and when he saw Hae Min's body. The defense highlighted these inconsistencies, arguing Jay was unreliable. There was also no direct physical evidence linking Adnan to the crime. His fingerprints and DNA were not found in Hae Min's car. Asia McClain was willing to provide an alibi, but for reasons unknown, the defense did not call her. After 6 weeks of testimony, on February 26, 2000, the verdict was announced. Adnan Syed was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison plus more than 30 years. A month later, Jay pleaded guilty to being an accessory and received 2 years of probation. The following year, Adnan's defense appealed, arguing among other points that failing to call Asia as a witness severely weakened the case. The appeal was denied, and the conviction stood. As years passed, Hae Min's case continued to attract attention. Independent journalists and private investigators re-examined the evidence, proposing new theories that Adnan might not have been the killer. If not him, then who? One widely discussed possibility pointed to Jay. Some argued he killed Hae Min and framed Adnan to deflect suspicion. The motives put forward are quite different. According to one version, Hae Min threatened to report Jay for dealing illegal substances. According to another version, Hae Min caught Jay cheating on Stephanie. Supporters of this theory argue that both scenarios could have led Jay to want to silence Hae Min permanently. However, this theory has several weaknesses. There is no hard evidence against Jay. Hae Min's diary does not mention anything relevant, and the relationship between Hae Min and Jay was not close, making it unlikely that they would have been alone together in the circumstances leading to the crime. Another theory claimed Jay and Jennifer acted together, killed Hae Min, and framed Adnan. It suggested they were romantically involved and that Hae Min discovered their secret, but the same problems persisted. Neither had a close relationship with Hae Min, and there was no clear way they could have lured her to meet them alone. Worse, there was no physical evidence to support this claim. Attention then shifted to Don Kleindienst, Hae Min's boyfriend at the time. His alibi, initially strong, came under scrutiny. His work schedule was confirmed by his mother, who managed the optical shop. And later, people noticed the log sheet listed an employee number that didn't match his profession. Suspicion grew when police couldn't reach Don until 1 o'clock MST. After Hae Min's disappearance, he said he got home around 7 o'clock p.m., but never followed up with investigators as promised. Another suspect is the man who found Hae Min's body. His story was consistent. He stopped by the side of the road after drinking beer and accidentally discovered a shallow grave. It later emerged that he had a criminal record related to forced exhibitionism, not violence. He took 2 polygraph tests. The first failed, the second passed. Experts said anxiety could explain the results. More importantly, it made little sense that a killer would lead police directly to the body. With no clear motive, this theory was quickly dismissed. Meanwhile, online forums and true crime communities fueled speculation, comparing Hae Min's case to other unsolved murders and suggesting a possible serial offender. Investigators rejected these ideas after finding no evidence linking those cases to Hae Min's death. Ultimately, despite the rumors, detectives and prosecutors returned to the same conclusion: Adnan. They argued he had motive, means, and opportunity. Years later, the legal fight resumed. In 2012, Adnan sought to overturn his conviction, but his appeal was denied in 2013. In 2015, the Court of Special Appeals of Maryland paused the case and sent it back to Circuit Court. The key question: should Asia McClain's testimony finally be considered? By November that year, the court agreed to reopen the case. Throughout the renewed proceedings, one factor proved crucial: independent journalistic investigations. Reporters and private researchers highlighted inconsistencies and questioned the reliability of evidence that had secured the original conviction. Central to this re-examination were Asia's account and doubts about the cell phone tower data presented at trial. The defense argued those records, especially incoming calls, that were misleading and should never have been used to persuade a jury. In November 2015, a judge reopened the case in the interest of justice. From February 3 to 9, 2016, a new hearing drew national attention. Asia testified under oath that she spoke with Adnan in the library on January 13, 1999, the day Hae Min disappeared. On June 13, 2016, a judge granted Adnan a new trial, ruling that his original defense team failed to properly challenge the cell phone location evidence. Later that year, his lawyers requested his release on bail while awaiting the retrial, but the motion was denied on December 29. 2 years later, Maryland's Court of Special Appeals reviewed the case again. However, in 2019, the Court of Appeals reversed that decision, blocking the new trial. For Hae Min's family, it felt like confirmation that justice had been served, and they believed it was time to move forward. Then, in 2021, the legal landscape shifted. A new state law allowed people convicted of crimes committed as minors, who had already served more than 20 years, to petition for relief. In 2022, a Baltimore court reopened the case again, citing serious concerns about the effectiveness of Adnan's original defense. As a result, he was released from custody while the legal process continued. By September 2023, Adnan held a press conference. Standing before reporters, he again declared his innocence, this time going further. In a detailed presentation with slides, he accused the prosecution of misconduct, alleging they failed to disclose information about possible alternative suspects. He also spoke about the toll the case had taken on his family over the decades. Finally, in March 2025, a Baltimore judge issued a dramatic ruling. The court upheld Adnan's conviction, but modified the sentence, acknowledging he had already served more than enough time. Adnan was granted 5 years of parole. Though still legally guilty, he would not return to prison. Both the prosecution and the defense agreed he no longer posed a danger to society. Now, more than 2 decades later, the case of Hae Min Lee and Adnan Syed remains one of the most debated in true crime history. Was justice truly served? Or did errors and omissions change the outcome of the trial? Did Adnan commit the crime? Or was he the victim of a flawed system? The questions remain.